Hello. You are very welcome to the Overlap Rugby podcast. I am Daragh. So here's Shane.
Hello.
This is episode 101, one after 100. And we're two brothers talking all things rugby from the point of view of Leinster and Ireland. Obviously, in the main, this show is going to be about the Lions tour. We had the opening stands of it last week, the opening match of the series, which was won by the Lions, a stunning game, 22-17. We're going to be looking back at that game in some detail, the mighty second half comeback that was, all of the talking points therein. We're going to pivot, of course, then to some news around the Lions tour, talk about Rassie Erasmus's antics, his hour-long video talking about the refereeing, gives a brief take on that before moving ahead to looking at the second test, also in Cape Town this weekend, where the Lions could clinch a historic series win, or the Boks could level it and take us to a dramatic decider. We're gonna that's gonna be the bulk of the show, but we're gonna have our preview, our review, and our little look at Rassie in the main.
That's it. That is going to be the bulk of it as well. Of course, just excited for that test right now. But there is other international news that we will then discuss. We're gonna start with Rugby World Cup qualifying developments as well. We had Tonga and the Cook Islands. Tonga getting the better of the Cook Islands there in that one. We're also going to look at South America's ongoing round robin for World Cup qualification as well, and we're going to sign off on our Rugby Europe 2021 coverage as well, because that's finished until towards the end of the year as well. So we're just going to make mention of all that and leave us see where we are as far as the Rugby World Cup 2023 race.
Absolutely. We're also going to take a look at the Tokyo Olympics. We had the medals awarded in the men's. We're going to look back on that tournament as well as ahead to the women's tournament, which is ongoing now for yourselves and ourselves. But just looking at the sevens in Tokyo, we'll take a look at that. We'll also look at some club footy as the Major League Rugby reaches its final. We're down to two teams, the Giltinis and Rugby Atlanta ATL are doing the final this Saturday, and that's definitely one to look forward to. So we're going to preview that as well, and then wrap up the show as we always do with the news of the week.
Yes, indeed. And thanks again, folks, for tuning in for last week, and let's keep that drive for 2K alive, which is we're getting there slowly but surely. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment and share. And just on comment as well, we did have a few good comments last week, and we mentioned a few of our commenters last week on the 100th episode, but we probably weren't thorough enough, as Papoose, one of our regular ones, pointed out. So for Papoose, as well as Black Unguni, Somerled Ile, Saul Evans, Hooper, Sammy Zuza, Sean O'Farrell, Georgie Gogsadze, Ian Webb, Benedict Walsh, Ryan, Big G, Gary Knox, Hanjo, the Sin Bin, Kentendo64 and AP. You're all legends in our book as well, so there's a thorough shout out. And to George K, all we have to say is ding.
Very thorough indeed. Good on you all. We do very much enjoy the chat, and thanks to all those who comment. And for those who are wondering, obviously we're set up in reverse this week, and I actually have a computer in frame here. Things are just a little out of kilter. We're also a little later. We had hoped not to dump our content on Friday.
Yes, and we did have teams named earlier in the week.
No excuse. Apart from just this is the reason why one of my hands has been in frame and will be in frame for the whole thing. I actually did myself an injury over the weekend, a bicycle injury, and severed, well, we won't get into it, did some damage to my hand that required surgery, which now requires me to be sort of careful with my hand, so I have it elevated up here on the edge. But that's kind of the reason for our lateness, and I'll accept sympathetic comments only and no judgmental comments.
He's had enough of them already.
Indeed. Only sympathy allowed. If you're otherwise, just don't mention it. But anyway, after all that ado and all that nonsense, as we often do at the start of the show, I think it's high time we pivot on and discuss the rugby.
Absolutely. Let's move on and look at the Lions, and starting as we said we would with Test 1, which is now in the books. It finished Springboks 17, Lions 22.
What a good game this was. Very, very interesting one. Obviously the Boks got off to a helter-skelter start. I mean, they picked up some penalties in the first half, edged themselves to a very nice lead, looked their explosive selves, their game plan working pretty well.
Pretty much to a T, The Lions were trying to move the ball a little bit. They opened with a box kick that nearly paid off but ended up in a penalty, and then out the other way. And then the one time they did try and move it, Elliot Daly got himself absolutely smashed by Latanya Wham, and ultimately that yielded a couple. I think it was 2 from Curry, 2 from Daly in the first quarter that led to scoring pens and opportunities for the Saffas to build their lead, which is exactly what they wanted to do. That's what the game plan is: apply the pressure, and when they panic or when they give away the penalties, kick them over and build a score that way. And it was very effective in the first half.
It stopped the Lions moving it. They built themselves a 12-3 lead at half time, and then in the second half the Lions hit back with a stunning comeback, picked up an early try. The Boks then responded with a try of their own, but the Lions, with 3 consecutive penalties in short succession, kicked themselves from 7 down to 2 up. The Boks getting the wrong side of the ref for that period, and then it was very, very tense. The Lions kicked a late penalty and to give them a 5-point lead, and the Boks then couldn't get back in over the line to steal the test. And
despite Willems's best efforts, actually, that was a great claiming of that restart.
So it was in the end that the Boks couldn't get over the line. Itoje with the final play of the day. He was man of the match in the day.
He was,
and it saw the Lions home by 5. But what a stunning game of rugby this was, and what a way that it changed in the second half.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it's two times in a row now that we've seen the Lions come on strong towards the end of the game, where the Saffas have kind of started the stronger, both in that Test 1 and in the South Africa A game. So there are definitely parallels there. Obviously, we're citing that South African A game as a de facto for a test because the teams are much the same, and it's the dynamics of these two sides meeting each other are now a little clearer to us, as well as we've seen it pretty much twice, or 1.5 times, I guess, if you count that. But it's definitely the Lions who will feel much more confident about their place now in it, and you can kind of see that in some of the responses to this game. Obviously, it's never good when you lose a 1-score game like that, but the Springboks have obviously had a few gripes to complain about. There were refereeing discrepancies that obviously were cited. We'll probably get into a bit of that when we're talking about what Rassie was on about. So there's definitely some genuine gripes, but there are other things that the Boks just got wrong. I thought the bringing in of the front row at half time on the dot was a bit wrong, because it was so early, and then the first thing that happened was a box kick that was contested by Duhan and then fumbled by Quagga Smith, and that led to a penalty, which ultimately led to, I think it led to a scrum, which led to a penalty, which led to an attacking set, which led to a try.
It was just at the beginning of the half. It was just Quagga claimed a box kick. The later one was like that, but Quagga just claims a box kick, gets tackled, gets back up. It was a complete free entrance, and it was on that moment, especially after the Boks front row introduced, as you said, that the game flipped for the first time. I mean, there were a few. The Boks, they had huge advantage in that first half. They kicked very well. They found themselves in the corner. They found themselves in the right part of the field very often.
LaRue was playing brilliantly in the backfield.
He was. They were dealing with much of what the Lions were throwing at them, and then cheap penalties allowed them to build themselves a lead. But crucially, they didn't find a try, and I think they could probably reflect on that. Especially
just a macro failing given the level of dominance. That's like an honest look at yourself. You're like, you probably should have been that dominant.
I looked in moments at Faf de Klerk's game when as particularly after Khaleesi breaks through that maul, gets to a yard out, and Itoje makes that great steal. You can argue to the cows come home about, was Cowan-Dickie in first? Was he in on his feet? The point, I think, is, as you put it when we were watching it, is just that he painted a very clear picture for the ref, a clean picture for the ref to give the call, and it was a wonderful play from Itoje. But actually at the base of that ruck, Faf was kind of yanking at the ball, trying to tell the ref, Itoje has his hands on it. But actually he wasn't properly pulling. He was just he wasn't looking at the ref, and he was just kind of half making the shape to pull at the ball, hoping that either Itoje had let it go or the ref would give him a penalty. The ref gives the Lions a penalty, and I'm thinking Faf needs to play a bit more heads up there. Rip that ball out, he can just pick it up, and then let's keep moving. You've just broken the line, you're a yard out from the line. I think if he gives one more pass, I think they get over the line. And there was just that greed in that moment, just not understanding the nature of the play was, here's a try, and
it should have been, because Khaleesi's break was fantastic through the middle of a splintered line out maul attempt that just caught the Lions defence completely with its pants down. And if a more clinical side, a quicker time to decide to clear that ruck, would probably have found a try there, but it was credit to Itoje for stopping that. But that's a mini error as well. And then the macro error of Pollard kicks, a conversion attempt they score at 50 minutes, I think, and Pollard misses the conversion, and that's their last score of the game. That gets them to 17 points, which is where they remain for the rest of the game. And I do know Pollard did miss a couple more penalties thereafter. One penalty thereafter
on the Hamish Watson tackle.
That's right.
He missed one then, which should have been a card. That's true. But he missed that one. He left 5 points out there, which is what they lost by. I mean, Bigger left a few out there as well. But in the main, they did finish quite slow. I also thought there was just that whole sequence in the middle of the game. Obviously, they were getting on the wrong side of the ref. The Lions were upped in energy. It was that sequence after the Springbok try, after the Faf de Klerk try, was I think very, very pivotal. But what started to happen was the Lions started to own the aerial battle.
They did.
They were working up that pretty much exclusively up that left
side.
Left
Ali
wing.
Price and Duhan van der Merwe were on the money. Like Murray's in for this week, but I don't know if he'll improve that area because the box kicks were so accurate from Price in this
and we
instance.
said we didn't want to see much kicking from 9, but the Lions had other ideas, to be fair to them. And in terms of the macro picture of how they approached playing the box, it was not sort of the romantic way in our head. It was very much Wales and South Africa 2019 semi-final approach to playing the game. There was lots of kicking off the base, but they had a height advantage on the left wing through Duhan. He beat Cheslin Colby in the air, he beat Quagga Smith in the air, he beat Ville Leroux in the air at one point. He was like that. They just had they got such return out of those left field kicks.
They did.
The height advantage was great, and up
and
front
actually
they
more
were,
so even than the height advantage. It was actually Quagga by the start of the second half. The few pivotal ones, it was actually pretty much on Quagga Smith a lot of the time. Like even the contests with Colby and stuff on that side were more 50-50 and less clear cut. Quagga kind of gave away a few penalties that allowed the momentum to just shift so seismically, but they were decisive, as you say. They were
contests, cleanly exiting the field, getting into the Springbok half, and then getting on top
immediately transitioning into offense. It was like the exit would get as far as the halfway, and then as the ball reached the halfway, it was an infringement from the box or just a well won penalty, and then they're up attacking straight away. So from one side of the pitch to the other in a moment. So that's why they're such a valuable play.
And part of the reason why the Boks are frustrated they got on the wrong side of the penalty count is they spent a lot of that second half in their own half defending, and the way that particularly Southern Hemisphere Australian refs ref the game, they're very light on the offense and they go easy on the offense and go hard on the defense a lot of the time, and that didn't suit the Boks. And
they also it's not even just offense or defense. They prefer teams that want to play on. They want to call play on most of the time, even when it's the wrong call, which occasionally it was the wrong call and he called play on. So, and that's just the instinct, is to keep that game flowing. And when you're a team like the Boks who like if you have penalty advantage, say, probably don't even want to use it. They want to go down to the corner, but you can say that to the ref and he'll give it to you, but he'll give it to you begrudgingly in that instance. You'd probably get more sympathy from a French ref for that kind of carry on, for the stop-start, let's play territory. An Aussie ref, if you're going to drop a ball just so that you can get the advantage so you can kick it down the line, he'll let you do that, but he'll be annoyed at you for the next thing, and you'll be perceived as the bad guys in his eye, not just by any bias, just by the fact that one team wants to keep KBA and the other team wants to slow it down.
So a rugby bias, I suppose, a stylistic bias as opposed to a national bias, but still, there were issues that the Boks can highlight in terms of how it was refereed. But I loved the I thought that the Lions, it was a drive-by shooting in terms of the forward back. This was where, going into the game, having seen the South Africa A game, I was unconvinced in the Lions' ability to cope with the South African forward pack for 80 minutes, and I actually thought you might get a game where there's not much in the way of tries. It's quite stop-start. Even if it's an even battle, I felt like the Boks would edge it and they'd be the more clinical team. They were perhaps a bounce of the ball away from doing that with some of that. They did cross the line 3 times and have one count, but for the most part that was fair. I mean, the Ville Leroux offside was a harsh call, but I thought that the capacity of the Lions they didn't get on top of the scrum battle by any stretch.
No, but they mixed it. They got some shots. It was a battle. The whole game. There was no dominance either way.
It was pretty even, and they took that away from the Lions. From the Boks, there was even enough money at the line out, except for the fact that they had way more. But they actually ended up decisively winning the set piece because of the quality of their offensive maul, which is what iced the game out on that right hand side of the field. It was also what got them their only try. True. It's been a brilliant weapon for them so far. Looks insanely sharp, and I was kind of seeing the perfect picture of the Lions. Like, there was one moment, this Bok pack, not a lot of teams, not any team that we've seen can live with them at their best. But there was moments when they had the ball, the Boks, and they couldn't get any go for it. And I was just looking at, I think it was Itoje put in a big tackle, Tyke Furlong get in over the ruck, and Alan Wynne Jones was kind of probing at the ruck. And it was like these sort of talismanic figures from Wales, English, and Ireland were just getting on top of the Boks, and it was kind of everything that the Lions could and should be came together in a wonderful, wonderful forward pack performance. And outside of some loose penalties in that first half, I thought they were absolutely majestic in the terms of how they just shut it down. They were scrummaged brilliantly, competed on the ball just savagely. Were every bit as annoying as the Boks can be to your offensive ball. They just never let them have anything, never let them live. And we saw that in the last play. Like if the Boks put more than 4 or 5 paces together, Itoje or someone was in with their hands just destroying that ball, making shite of it, or turning it over. And I just thought it was an exceptional performance, especially from Itoje, near enough an opus performance from such a great player.
Early going in the first quarter, he got sat down by Etzebeth, and I think might have been Khaleesi helping him with the hit. But
Peter Steff
actually, but he got driven back, and Etzebeth did a big kind of very physical, very kind of alpha male thing of just lying on top of him and adjusting so that he's sat on top of him as he gets up by leaning on his chest. Just a big man-handling physical play, and that was good in the first quarter. But then later in the game, that Itoje kind of fitness level that we know about, that it's just like even in top-level European rugby and top-level Six Nations rugby, all the top tier, he just goes in the last quarter. He just keeps going, and when others are starting to fade, that's when he's almost at his best. And then later in the game, we saw him sit down Etzebeth. It was a great battle between two literal giants of the game.
To be fair to Etzebeth, actually, of all of them, I thought he kept going for much of the game himself, doing what he does. He shut down one of the Lions Mauls, one of the few Lions Mauls that got shut down was done so by Etzebeth. He had a very fine game. But I don't think you could argue it was very close, the forward battle, but I don't think you could argue the Boks won it, because the most decisive blow that was landed, there were a few, but the decisive blows were pretty much all Lions.
And there big were turnovers, Lions offensive maul.
Big turnovers in the big maul. Those were the two areas that I'd really cite as pretty much game winning. That and the aerial battle down the left hand side.
Players like just the performances of the likes of Courtney Laws in the second half, or even Jack Conan in the second half, just the carry a game out of them. Whereas where Quagga was starting to struggle, having had a pretty decent first half, the wheel started to come off in the second, and Khaleesi, even similar, that bust happened in the first half, and that was brilliant. He did find himself once or twice in the wide channels, but they weren't really slick enough or quick enough in the second half to make any of those positive attributes count or land. They just weren't at all, and especially then in that last 10 minutes when Pollard was off the pitch and Villy was off the pitch, and it was a bit more of a kind of a disjointed back line that they were looking at, and they just, in that do or die phase, Willemse, fair play to him, looked really, really good off the bench, and he's back in this week on merit. But him claiming that kickoff that the Lions shouldn't have given them, I'm gonna mention that as well. Like, France broke the Lions broke what we have dubbed the France 07 rule, which is based on Ireland v France 2007 Six Nations, where Ireland are, I think, 1 point up and elect to kick a penalty on the 78th minute to make it a 4-point game, and then immediately cough up the restart in very similar fashion to what Willemse was able to produce for them, where it's like, it's not icing the game to kick that 3. It feels like it is, but it's just not. Kicking the corner and icing it, playing clock management is the one thing. Like, it's a funny one, because all rugby parlance, the SAFA commentators won't say that, the Northern Hemisphere commentators they'll kick the 3, and then sure enough the players will elect to kick that 3. The only time in rugby coverage I've seen it cited as a mistake is by the MLR guys, the guys in the US who are used to the NFL and used to wait a minute, hang on, let's do the maths here. 2 minutes left on the clock and you're going to kick a 3 and allow them to get a possession? That's crazy to me. Why don't you go to the corner and kill the game? It
comes back to the the American principle of don't give whoever it is, Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady, don't give them the ball back.
Exactly.
If we can just keep the ball down here, keep their offense out of the game. I suppose from a Lions theory, it's backing your defense. I would have personally liked to see them go to the corner there. Farrell gets a lot of praise for that kick, but as you say, they end up under their own.
I still think it's the wrong decision.
They end up under their own sticks. But I suppose the counter argument is that the Boks weren't scoring in 5s at that time. They were scoring in 3s, and it's possible.
On the evidence of that last phase, they could have kept going for quite a while without scoring. Just even that, they got given the ball, which is the nightmare scenario from a Lions fan, which did develop, is that Willemse wins that ball over Daly, and then you're like, oh no. But it turned out that it was a very beleaguered and disjointed Springboks side by that stage, and they couldn't string anything together.
And that was the telling thing. If you're a Springbok fan and you're frustrated with the match itself, I mean, there's a few areas, and we'll look at the sort of key adjustments ahead of the next game in terms of our preview of that game. But that was definitely a point of sourness if you're a Bok fan. They had some moments in the multi-phase, but in that last sequence, the biggest difference between the Springboks and the All Blacks at times is that the All Blacks are a favourite. They're a betting favourite when they're 10 out from the line and their clock is in the red and it's a 1-score game. That's what makes them such great champions. And the Springboks, while they have other qualities that are magnificent, that has kind of gone out of their game. And it was something that, off the back of the Heineke Meyer era and then the Alistair Coetzee era, you could say that the offensive rugby was really being developed. And that was kind of there at the beginning of the Rassie era when they had that great series against England in 2018.
Very high scoring, very high tempo series.
Yeah, some
much higher tempo series than we've had in this particular Safa one.
Sure, yeah. And some of Faf's best work in that series back when he was playing for the Lions in South Africa. There was wonderful attacking rugby, and they brought some of that to the Rugby Championship. But then, just sort of as the months rolled by and the World Cup got nearer, more and more of their scores came from defense, and then their game prioritized to kicking as the tense, tier 1 battles developed and cup final footy emerged. But have they found themselves now in a position where, that their offense is a bit more clunky, and despite the great talent that they have out there, and neither centre doing a thing wrong. I mean, there was Demi and Lindy, like his performance would have gone under the radar, but I was citing in that second half, in the fleeting bits of ball that he got, mostly off first and second phase. Yeah, he would put a bit of footwork on the ball. He'd suck in 2 or 3 defenders, get forward about 4 or 5 metres, and present clean, quick ball for Faf, with which the shape wasn't there to do much. And the Boks found themselves in a position where they needed a score to come back into the game, and while they were close to getting it in moments, they weren't able to convert, and that would definitely be a work on that I would cite in terms of their broad development of their
harshly
game.
Just in terms of Lindy, but the point, he did a perfect job on that score that wasn't for Leroux, where it was off Leroux's bomb that Daly dropped, that he just gathered, fixed and found Am on the touchline, and that allowed the space to get the kick away. It was debatable whether he was ahead of the kicker.
For me, that try is good.
Looked like a good try, but then the try that immediately followed probably wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the set piece that occurred.
100%,
so
that's
that was
probably
the Faf
true.
de Klerk try that came like 2 minutes later in the same spot. But
I mean, that was a much prettier try.
It's true. Yeah, that was a
that one counted.
I actually thought the Faf one, despite coming from a loose pass from Pollard, but that allowed the Lions' very disciplined defence kind of broke for a second. I think Watson broke first, and then Price went to follow him, and then Daly tried to follow Price, and then fell over. And then Peter Steff, just after gathering the ball, just got up and saw Daly fall over and just ran around.
Yeah, it was a really lovely turn that he did as he was picking it up, though. He just instantly into offense and found the outside, and it was definitely a well taken try from the Bok point of view.
And that was their last one. Then that was their last score, and then they had a similar phase later on where they were trying to work similar spaces out of it, but guys like Pollard were a little bit slower. Even guys like Faf were a little bit slower, and Faf's rhythm was a little bit off in the whole game. I didn't think he was able to stamp his authoritative tempo.
They weren't attacking the game that much, and they ended up, like, in the first half they were getting the better of moments. They got enough entrances that it was important, and they had themselves on top of the game. But Faf's running of the offense still wasn't great, and his kicking game wasn't that great.
No.
And in the end, that told. The Lions put South Africa under more pressure than they themselves were put under from the kicking game.
A few of those box kicks from Ali Price to Duhan were better than anything that either Faf or Pollard produced in the whole game.
Yeah,
they were
100%.
Just more on the money, and therefore yielded more. So it's just an execution thing.
Exactly. They managed to win the ball on exits. They managed to get up the field with more consistency than the South Africans, and in some sense kind of out South Africa, which was the way that I wouldn't have recommended them playing, but to see them execute it to a T was very, very impressive. And the Boks found themselves flapped and on the wrong side of the ref. I think they would look at some other moments as well. I would certainly cite that Quagga Smith moment that we touched on at the start of the half. I mean, we glossed over it a little, where he takes the high ball and then gets tackled, and he actually has Malcolm Marks right there next to him along with Mapimpi. So it's just fine. He just needs to present the ball back, but instead he kind of thinks he isn't held, even though he is held, gets up and runs. And just like that, at the very start of the half, after holding out the Lions on their own end, keeping it to a 2-score game, it's such a crucial moment in the game, and they just give the Lions an entrance, and entrances are so precious, and the Lions' offensive maul is so good at the moment. The Boks have done a great job of preventing them from having any of those clean entrances in the first half. Then they give them one up so cheaply a few seconds into the second half. That was actually just a colossal moment and a colossal error from Quagga Smith that let the Lions in. So from the South African point of view, tightening up a few errors.
A 5-minute defensive set that ultimately yielded another penalty back to the corner, and then the maul try.
Yeah.
So it just means that guys like Malcolm Marks just off the bench or Kitsoff and stuff have to put in 2 or 3 tackles in this sequence and scramble into position and all this and defend gamely defend their line, which they do as well as they can, but it just saps the energy. It means there's less explosivity into your prop changes, which you do want.
Yeah.
And the Lions managed to get on the flip side. Gatland managed to leave Furlong on, and Furlong put in a great shift, as you were citing, resourcing rucks, spearheading mauls very, very well.
Yeah, that maul try, he was like just on the turn, he was so good on that pivoting.
Little swivel, really good technical front row work, but he kept going for most of 60 minutes, and then it meant that Sinclair and Mako could be launched into a pivotal scrum at that point and win it decisively, and that was just another really great moment against what we've been saying is probably the stronger of the Bok front row units that they could choose from, and they've opted for it as an option for this week's test, as we'll get into, but yeah, it was a big psychological win for the Lions, and a big momentum swing in the game, as they were just piling up in that period of it, in the second, at the tail end of the second or the tail end of the third quarter, I should say. That's in the second half.
Absolutely, yeah. No, that was the decisive few penalties, and the decisive few they were all won by just the forwards getting on top. The Boks the kicking game yielding results, and the Boks blinking first, I guess. It was tremendous work. Jack Conan, as you mentioned, the whole forward pack, and then the introductions. I thought Hamish Watson was a little loose, but he
should have been binned, so he should have.
But Ken Owens, I thought was excellent off the bench. They all added something. I think when Murray and Farrell came on then with 20 to go, and the Lions did tighten up, but the maul is the offensive maul ended up seeing them home. Along with the kicking game, to be honest, the Boks found themselves a little slower off the mark. They were less able to shut down Lions attacks in the second half than they were in the first. That much is definitely true.
Unequivocally,
you just watch a Lions multi-phase in the first 20 minutes versus the last 20, and they were able to get away with way more. It was kind of slow and off nine, and the kind of thing that in the opening stanza Eben Etzebeth and the like eat alive, they were just getting away with. They were able to go forward a phase, set it up, go back a phase, whip it back to Farrell, and he kicked it in behind, and they were doing that with little resistance.
Yes, indeed.
So they had
there
more
was
energy.
That one moment at 70 odd minutes or 72 minutes where the Lions were like in the process of trying to throw an absolute clanger under their own sticks, where I think it was Liam Williams batted it with Colby, and it turned out it touched Colby's arm just as well for the Lions, who didn't know much about it, but it came to Ken Owens, who shipped it on to Sinclair, who did a little pull back to Farrell, who did a little shape to catch, and then
no, that was Hogg through the pass.
Hogg through the pass. So even through Sinclair's to Hogg to back to Farrell, who just goes no, and then Henshaw's like, oh shit, and then grabs it and chucks it away. It's like all shoveling badly, but you could see actually the line speed of the Boks, because it was Dialinde pushing in on Hogg and Farrell, and it was Am hitting Henshaw, and then outside it was Mapimpi beating Daly, and poor Daly could not get a play off against anyone all day long. Mapimpi beating him, and then dotting down for what would have been another defensive hunger try, which they still have dialed in even as they're tired, because they were tired at that point, and in general in open play in the middle third they weren't applying the same pressure, but in that instance where they didn't realise there was a knock on, they were capitalising and they were still dangerous.
And that try is such a part of their winning picture as well. It's kind of, they would feel that the bounce of the ball didn't go their way in that sense, and that a few different moments, and it could have been a very typical Bok picture, but they left it tight. They didn't get the try when they were on top in the first half, and then they only
scored 17 points at home, which is just not enough really, and they got them racked up after 50, so all of that is, you'd have to look at yourselves and think that's not great on our part.
They probably needed another try or two, and they needed one or two more things to go their way, but there was still some mighty fine stuff to build from. I thought Etzebeth's performance was excellent. I thought Peter Steff again was excellent. Khaleesi looks in great form. The halfbacks were need improvement, but there's definitely potential there. And the centres were as solid as ever. Indy and Am didn't put a foot wrong between them.
LaRue had his best showing all
LaRue
year
was brilliant.
He was absolutely brilliant. That little tackle on Henshaw after Henshaw's bust at the very end of the first half, that could have been a game-changing try.
That was about the only clean break that the Lions generated through multi-phase. It was good from the Lions, but well shut down by the scrambled E.
Billy LaRue batting the hand, but attacking the ball, which is just good defensive chops, which you expect from all Springboks generally. But he's not the biggest man, but that was a very good play. But beyond that, he was pretty assured back there, and that's kind of what they want in him, is to be that guy, that big veteran captain.
Oh no, I'm a believer now. I called for him to be dropped again, I think, this week, and I've done it many times, because in times he's frustrated me, and I'm excited about the other South African talent that could fill that jersey. But no, he stepped up in a major way again, was absolutely solid, was never really at fault for anything that went wrong. Likewise, Mapimpi. I thought actually Colby of that back three was the guy who lost his battle most cleanly and was not actually in the game.
Yeah, it was one of the rare times where you were thinking, geez, Colby's nearly a problem out there for the Springboks. I've never seen that.
There is no Lionel Messi of rugby. It is more of a team game than football, and nobody can nobody not named maybe Dan Carter or Brian O'Driscoll can just take a game and do what they want with it.
Yeah.
There's always attributable matchups, and where Colby is magnificent on the ground, maybe Duhan has him in the air. Sorry, kicking the mic there.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was a fascinating test match, and I think deserved winning from the Lions.
Yeah.
The refereeing notwithstanding. But yeah, listen, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it whets the appetite for what's to come.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. 100% very exciting test match. 1-0 Lions, which is just exciting, and it means another one-score game like the South Africa A game, so we will be treated to 2 more excellent test matches regardless of the results in both. We're going to just pivot on to some news relating to the Lions. We're going to start with just a bit of housekeeping. We probably know, because based on that game, the match officials for the test series, obviously you had Nick Berry reffing the last game, and you have Ben O'Keefe and Mathieu Reynal as well. But the TMO was meant to be Brendan Pickerel of New Zealand, but he couldn't travel there actually. He was ruled out just before Test 1, the week of. So Marius Jonker from South Africa has stepped in, and he was in the TMO booth for Test 1 and will be for Tests 2 and 3. That was news breaking just after we shot the podcast, just before we uploaded the week of. But there was all kinds of follow up to that, because obviously Springbok fans weren't happy about it. Then Gatland was kind of suspicious about it. There was all kinds of chat about it. There was pressure, I think, applied from some sides of the SAFA kind of rugby world to try and kind of remove him or get someone else in there and stuff like that. I don't know. Yeah, what ultimately ended up telling, I think the one instance when he came in the early going in that first test, he kind of did somewhat bottle a decision that could have gone the South African way. It
was the Willie LaRue one. Like, he was looking at it and he didn't really know, and it was very tight.
Yeah,
and that was the one where you could hear him go, "Well, we think, it's." We think he's offside. It was like it was hard to tell.
Yeah.
He looked to be behind the ball to my eye, and it was a nice try. I would have let it go.
Yeah,
but it was one of those calls that was on the margins.
It's one of those weird ones. It's a needs must scenario. Like it was like, times are so difficult now. He couldn't manage to make it here because of his COVID and quarantine related issues. So we make do with what we have. We had SAFA officials for the whole tour so far, based on just convenience and locality. So. No, I have no issue with it, to be honest. I think it's fine.
I wouldn't have worried about it.
Yeah.
The other main bit of news that you would have obviously seen was today as we're shooting, and yesterday as you're watching, Rassie Erasmus dumped an hour-long...
An absolute bomb, so it was, of madness.
An hour-long video, giving out the beans about the referee, basically, and refereeing and World Rugby, and basically going through, with a fine-tooth comb. I believe it was sort of 26 clips that should have been, refed in favour of the box that decisions weren't given for. It was a sort of a very weird.
Yeah, it was an unusual one from Rassie. I didn't quite say it. It's the first time I'd ever listen to something Rassie's putting out there and be like, Rassie, what are you doing? Keep that to yourself, man. It doesn't even, I don't know. Like, it's the nature of putting out an hour-long video that's basically just a ref whinge, which is like, you expect a bit of whinging from the losing side in any test match. It's never a fun thing to lose a test match. There were some contentious calls, but I thought
they were getting ridden in moments by the referee.
They were.
There was certainly the match was decided in so many other areas that for that to be your main takeaway, I think you'd need to be a little blinkered. Like, I don't think they deserved to win the game on balance. I think they faded towards the end of it.
Yeah.
They couldn't get on top up front, and they couldn't get up top in the set piece.
A few tactical errors, a few selection errors. Like, why are the front row coming in at half-time and not making the desired impact? Why is Elton Yankees on the bench when Willemse can cover 10 and he's going to come in and not really contribute? All of these are factors that you would have... when we were doing our World Cup, waxing lyrical about the Springboks getting everything right while England were getting things kind of slightly wrong because of that. There's nothing like that in this test. You would have to just look at the big picture and think the Boks probably didn't get 100% right here. And as much as they may have been ridden by the ref, I was going to cite that point I made before, where it's like, that it's an Aussie ref, and like, we as fans will know that to expect certain things like play on to be said quite a lot, even
like,
if it's
screw
not
that
the right
defense
call.
I want the offense
to still have the ball, that kind of argument, like the clear picture at the breakdown, the kind of Pocock thing, getting rewarded, but also encouraging people to actually lift the ball, or make an attempt to lift the ball, or give them time to try and lift the ball and play on, as opposed to being the team that are like, he's there, can we please have a whistle now? We've had like nearly 8 seconds of uninterrupted play, can we stop it and kick it that way? Like, he's never going to be on the side of the team that want to do that, and that can snowball, and there is like there's a bit of momentum that leads into that. It's a game. It's alive. It's very frenetic. He's only human. There are mistakes like that, but it's just the nature of putting out an hour-long vid that just cites all of these things. Like you cite these things for your own edification or for your own adjustments, but that's a different thing from going through immediate trial by media.
Yeah, I mean there's two sides to this and 2 points to this. And the first, I guess, in Rassie's defence, you could say...
He's not wrong in some instances.
Well, I think it has to do... It's more than just not being wrong. It has to do with how World Rugby communicate the refereeing and the occasional and not occasional, the constant and baffling inconsistencies that arise.
Which are maddening for us as fans, and I'm sure very frustrating for coaches or
indeed,
water boys.
Indeed, but I suppose that first point is just on how these sort of refereeing decisions and how the sort of macro picture of how the game is being refereed is communicated to teams and coaches. And I know there's a lot of coaches out there who have been frustrated at times that they feel like, you know, there isn't that open flow of communication for a game that's as open to interpretation as it is, and they hear that, you know, a certain area of the game is going to be, you know, strictly refereed, and then it doesn't transpire that way, or they get mixed messaging, or things change week on week.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've noticed, as you say, inconsistencies constantly around the game in terms of how it's being refereed, and at times it feels like World Rugby can hide behind this sort of veneer of, you know, respect the officials, the referee is sacrosanct in the game of rugby, and to question him is to betray our values, and to you know, go out and criticise us in any way for how the games are refereed is just morally wrong. And they can hide behind that sometimes, while, you know, frustrating and baffling and consequential, you know, mistakes are made. You know, I would say, like the last Lions tour, you know, there was these issues, you know, we've spoken about pork till the cows come home, but there's other referees out there who've had, you know, very bad games, and then have come out and gotten even bigger games and made mistakes in those, and it seems like
even bigger games as a result of that. And then you see refs at lower levels make perfect judgments and make a perfect game of rugby happen, and then never seem to get a test match at all.
Yeah,
and you're just like, wait a minute.
Exactly. They say they want to reward, you know, keeping the game going and having flow and rewarding the offensive team, and then a guy referees a game and he pins the offensive team for things that are completely wrong, and then or doesn't keep the game flowing, or in a certain game this year I remember a referee giving some ludicrous amount of penalties. It was near enough 30 penalties. He blew his whistle, and the next thing he had an even bigger game. And these things definitely play in the heads of coaches, and with a game that's as open to interpretation and as open to sort of emphasis in different areas as rugby, it's important to get
as consequential as the Lions as well.
It's important that he has clarity and that he understands things. And I gather the reason he's released the video is because he's extremely frustrated that he hasn't had any kind of open communication channel between him and the referees. But to that end, he's got a lot of sympathy with a lot of rugby directors, and this is potentially something that's just coming to a head.
It could be a watershed moment like that, where
this has been the status quo for years.
Well, we've seen Eddie Jones kick up enough of a fuss, which is something he cited in that video as well, where the laws changed because of that game between England and Italy, where Italy threw Conor O'Shea and a bit of nous and a bit of wildness and kind of banking on the English being a bit too silly to adjust on the fly, which was true, where they just decided that there was no once the tackle was there, just no one bridge over it, and a ruck hasn't actually been formed, it's still a tackle, so there's no offside line, so you can just kind of roam everywhere. And it took Eddie Jones kind of just going on the media and like kind of lampooning that refereeing performance that for World Rugby to kind of be forced to take a look at it, and then the law changed. And Rassie cited in this, and maybe there's a thought to that as well, where he's just like, well, unless I say it, maybe it'll go unnoticed or unchanged. And there's certainly a noble argument in that, but then somewhat. The flip side is I don't think it's particularly noble to go on an hour-long tirade about the ref the week of the second test.
There's ways to do things and ways not to do things, and I didn't think it was particularly nice of him to sort of go after the ref in this way. I also thought it was like, it wasn't, I don't want to be too, like, I don't want to blow it out of proportion, but there's a touch of dishonesty to it as well, when you're going through with a fine-tooth comb every decision that could have gone your way. I mean, one of the clips that he used was Faf de Klerk's hit Curry's hit on Faf de Klerk, which after the kick, which yielded a penalty, which it was, where the ball landed, that yielded 3 big points. It was a big moment in the game. It was amply punished, or aptly punished, and then he goes back and says, "Oh, that could be a yellow card." I mean, this is stuff that's wildly open to interpretation, and there's it's an old saying in the NFL. I think I've said on the podcast before, is like, if you look closely enough, there's a holding call on every play. That is very much true of the game of rugby union.
Every breakdown,
you can find side entries. I'm sure
this is why they had to get rid of the captain's challenge, because too many wily Munster men would go through like the big 20 phase sequence that they defended, that it's defended just about before the try was scored, and then they went, can we just captain's challenge that? I'm sure there was a ceiling back there at ruck number 5 or 6.
Entry on that third ruck after the line out back there. I thought he was a little dodge, and there certainly are ways to do that. There were a couple of big calls went against them. There was the chip in behind went against them, that Villaroo was called for offside. There was the Hamish Watson card that should have been. Outside of that, I think we're really splitting hairs. I do. I think that you could easily pick out a number of Springbok transgressions that weren't picked up on.
That's true.
And run a similar video. So from that sense, it's a little dishonest.
He also doesn't have any. That's where the dishonesty goes. Is like he stacks. There's a lot of Springbok examples, and there are no examples of the ones that the Springboks either got away with or got given where that was probably dubious, and that's where the kind of slight dishonesty in it comes in, where it's just you are only lobbying for your side, which is his right, but I just don't think it is right. I think perhaps a bit wrong.
Don't think it's the right thing to do, and what it has done, I think, in practicality now, is heaped the pressure on the referees this week in every department. It's going to be Ben O'Keefe taking the game, but massive pressure has now been put on him to just have a clean, good performance, and it could potentially poison the well in terms of setting a precedent for this kind of public giving out about the referees. As much as I would accuse World Rugby of hiding behind that veneer of the referees being infallible, I do also think it's a value that's worth having, that the referees should be respected, and I don't know that this is the most respectful way of voicing your grievance.
No, I would agree with that, but I do think it's an ongoing conversation, because I don't think we've landed on the right way to referee necessarily yet, because I think there are inconsistencies, there are changes in interpretation, and sure, we even mentioned that Gatland was meeting with the new officiating team just because of that fear that it would be wildly inconsistent from what the referees who were from South Africa and Wayne Barnes, who were doing the previous matches, were going to be officiating on. So it's always tough. I think there are better ways to deal with it than what Rassie did, but sure, look, he dropped it now, and there's all kinds of things you can comb through and see in it now. it's a fairly long old video. He gets through a lot of content in it, so it is interesting. But it's the one instance, as I said before, that I was looking at something Rassie did and thought, no, I don't agree with that. I think you probably shouldn't have done that. Because before now, I haven't been able to decide on one, including the water boy stuff. I think he should keep being water boy.
And in the macro sense, I think it's interesting as far as how it'll affect the test series. You know, is it a sign of a coach that's flapped a little bit?
It is a little. Well, it's certainly I expect they will be breaking down their own analysis. It's not just the officiating that went wrong, because certainly when we were rewatching the game, we were going like, well, there's more things that went wrong for South Africa here than the referee. Like they got a fair bit wrong. So, and they, on balance, I think deserve to lose the game, just even from a neutral point of view. And if you can't arrive at that honest conclusion, you're not being intellectually honest with how you break down a game, and it's not going to serve you well in the adjustments that you make either.
No question. But listen, parking that Rassie aside, I think we need to now pivot on and look ahead to the meat of the second test. This is huge. Test 2 takes place in Cape Town Stadium in Cape Town, as Test 1 did. 31st of July on Saturday. That's 8 p.m. I believe kickoff time in South Africa, and 7 p.m.
7 over here,
in England. So prime enough time, a reasonably prime time kickoff for the all important second test. Ben O'Keefe, as we said, is the referee. Lots of pressure obviously mounting on him.
Barry and Raynell on the sideline.
Raynell
and Marius Jonker in the booth.
Yes, pressure on the SAFA as well. So that referee team very much under the spotlight, but we'll see how they go. It's obviously, the Lions are on the hill now. The first test in the bank. I think there was twice in history they haven't won the series after winning the first test.
I know 2001.
2001 was one. I think I can't quite remember when the other one was, but it was a ways back.
30 or something.
And only once, when they lost the first test, have they won the series as well. So the first test tends to be quite decisive. But this test, needless to say, could level us up and tip the favour back in terms of arguably the fresher squad after the Lions having played such a long season. Very interesting game. I expect the Boks to be ferocious and furious and hope to make the key adjustments and come out with that same blistering energy that we always want them to bring. The Lions, they're on the hill. They have the opportunity to make history. I think letting it slip, as they did in 2001 with the 1-0 lead, things can then snowball on you. So
they'll want to see it home.
They'll very much want to see it home and do it this week, just not to bring it to that third test with the Boks and all that sort of
and a
emotional
whole other
energy.
Week of all kinds of other stuff in the media and all kinds of whatever else goes on.
It's a huge game in that regard, and I think we can expect a game that is likely to rival the second test in 2009 for physicality. I think you're expecting
some of the ferocity in those hits was crazy.
And some of those SAFAs are going to be well jaded by what happened to them last week.
Not even jaded, just stung. And be hoping to kind of put in some hits on to get some of that frustration out, take it out on a few red jerseys over there. That's what we're expecting, anticipating some massive collisions, which we were treated to in Test 1 as well. But the ante is up. If you beat the Springboks on their home patch, they're definitely going to come out with spitting a bit of fire in the second test.
And I expect the Lions to be spitting stuff as well. It's going to be really, really fun, this one. We do have the squads, as we have done. They've been obliging enough to release them early in the week on most occasions.
That's right.
So the Springboks have a few changes. I'll just run through the squads now. We'll talk about what we think in a moment. But they've gone with Kitsoff, Mbanambi and Malherbe in the front row. Couple of changes there. They've gone with Etzebeth and Mostert staying true in the second row. They've gone with Khaleesi, Peter Steff, and Visa comes in for the unfortunate Smith, who had a rough day of it, starting last week at 8. Faf and Andre Pollard get to go again. Hopefully Pollard's injury not too bad after last week, although he did end the game looking ginger. He gets the start this week. Then Dale Indy and Am maintain their role in the centres, two pretty flawless players at 12 and 13. Mapimpi, Colby and LaRue make up the rest of the 15. On the bench has Malcolm Marks, Trevor and Nyakanye switching to loose head cover. And then Vincent Koch coming in to cover tight head. Oxenche drops out very harshly on him. He had a fine first 40 last week, and now he seems to be out of the reckoning.
He left the pitch and they were 12-3 up and doing grand. And now he's out of the test.
Hard to be the man to blame, but yet it transpires that way. And Lou Diager covering lock. Van Staden and Quagga Smith make up a 6-2 split.
The bomb squad reassembled in new form for the Boks.
Indeed, and Herschel Yankees and Damian Willemse are the two back subs.
Yes, at the expense of Elton Yankees, which is probably right and proper. And the Lions, meanwhile, have also named their team, and they've gone with a couple of changes, but the spine of the team remains pretty true. We have Mako Vunipola coming in at loose head, with Luke Cowan-Dickey and Tyke Furlong retaining their jerseys. That makes up the front row. Itoje and Alan Wynne-Jones renewing their partnership in the locks, with Courtney Laws retaining the jersey at number 6 after a great showing. Tom Curry and Jack Conan also retained. So it's only one change in the pack at number 1 for the Lions.
And that's an enforced one. Wynne-Jones didn't play last week.
Wynne-Jones was out before kickoff last week, so Sutherland actually came in and did an okay job, but actually Mako was more impressive off the bench, so here he is getting the start on the basis of that. Conor Murray is in at 9 for Ali Price, who makes way and drops to the bench. Interesting call that. He partners Dan Bigger. Then you have Robbie Henshaw partnering with Chris Harris, who comes in for Daly. Daly drops out to the bench as well. And then the back three remains unchanged. We have Duhan van der Merwe, Anthony Watson and Stuart Hogg at fullback. And the replacements are Ken Owens, Rory Sutherland, Kyle Sinclair in the front row, Ty Byrne and Toby Falatau in to cover the loose forward / kind of second rows. And then you have Ali Price, Owen Farrell and Elliot Daly completing the 5-3 split, more traditional 5-3 split of the Lions.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. On the face of it, I think I like the Bok adjustments a little better. I think they've gone back to the 6-2 split, which is dead right. I think getting Elton Yankees out of there and keeping Willemse in as not just one of the good utility back who can cover all corners, but actually just a really informed player who I think is the guy you'd most trust to step into any of the jerseys,
even if it has to be down. Pollard, who
if
Pollard can't do the full 80, which maybe is a factor, was seemingly a factor in the decision to put Elton on the bench, but I don't think it was vindicated. I think we've learned a few too many times from that experiment. It just doesn't work for the Boks.
No, I think Elton is no disrespect to him, but I think barring a miraculous transformation in form, I don't think he'll play for the Springboks again. It's a bold statement, but I don't think I think he might have disappointed one too many times when he came off the bench and dropped key ball and wasn't able to add things on the toughest stage. So no, but Willemse by contrast is in fine form, making that play last week. I think him on the bench, his back cover makes good sense. He'll come on and impact the game. The 6-2 split makes sense. The change at 8, Jasper Wiese, I was sceptical enough when I saw Quagga Smith in last week, and I think that scepticism justified.
Yeah, because he was brilliant in the South African A game, and he's more of a like for like guy with Dwayne Vermeulen, who they're obviously missing, and missing is a big crucial word. Like his telepathy with Khaleesi on defense and stuff, all of that stuff was great about them that they are without. Wiese did a great job of slotting in and looking big and barnstorming and physical, but also dealing with those high balls that Quagga was struggling with. He did that in the South Africa A game, so I think he's a sensible decision. And then renewing that 6-2 split, which is a big job for Van Staden, who now comes into the match day squad as well to make up that 6-2 split. They'll be looking for more impact off the bench than they got in the first test.
For sure, and it remains to be seen whether they can bring that, but I like the adjustment off the face of it. Interesting to see Oxenche gone, as we noted, but Trevor Nyakanye, obviously it's a big ask on a week's notice to change scrummaging from tight to loose, although that is the easier switch to make. When I last saw him play loosehead, he was extremely destructive. Maybe they've seen some stuff in training. On the face of it, I think a starting front row with Kitsoff and Malherbe and Mbanambi with Nyakanye and Vincent Koch to come on is pretty meaty.
And
Malcolm Marks, of course, as well, is probably better on paper than what they had last week. So I definitely like that adjustment, and then I like keeping the back line the same in the main. So those Bok adjustments I like. The Lions ones, there's always going to be more questions because there's more options. So that definitely is a factor. Personally, I think I've been saying for the whole tour, now I've been wrong on many things in the whole tour. I said they should have thrown the ball around and they didn't. They stuck to their guns and played a very good box kicking game and set piece game and won the game that way. Fair play to them. That's kind of I didn't see that coming, so I might be full of crap. They might just go and do it again. But I do wonder how much a test like that takes out of a team, and I would have loved to have seen some of the weapons that they have deployed. And that's the way I'd put it. It's not a question of dropping people, it's a question of they have unused weapons, they have fresh weapons, like Jamie George. It's not because Cowan-Dickey or Ken Owens did anything wrong that throwing Jamie George in there might have been a good idea, or Adam Beard, or Johnny Hill.
Simmons, these guys.
They've a lot of guys who can mix it at the top level. I might have liked to see a bit more rotation just to keep things fresh. But on the flip side, now they have a lot of fresh guys if they need them coming into next week, who should be sharp enough to go and jump in after having had a few run outs themselves. They should be sharp enough to be thrown in next week if need be. So that balance is okay, but the changes are definitely interesting. You know, Murray in for Ali Price. Price played so well, cleared the ruck really well, which is something Murray has struggled with, and his box kicking was arguably more on the money than anything Murray's been delivering
in recent time.
I don't necessarily love that adjustment. I do like Mako for Sutherland. Mako's earned it after a really shaky start to the tour.
I like Harris for Daly as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would have even seen Bundy in as well. What I don't like is Daly on the bench. In fact, I think if Daly in there and Liam Williams out of there, it seems crazy to me. I thought Daly was very poor in that test.
Yeah, he struggled.
He struggled in every area. Like, granted, starting out a game by getting absolutely smashed by Latanya Am is not ideal for anyone. Like, the third minute you get absolutely cracked, and then a few minutes later you're asked to kick a long kick, which is your specialty, and then you leave it short because you just got cracked. And then it's like, oh yeah, wait, I'm a little bit broken. And then for the rest of the game you just couldn't get a thing off, which is my fear, because it was the same in the World Cup final. And it's like Elliot Daly can look very, very good when he's running in lovely tries from 13 against the Stormers, but I just fear for him out there against those blocks. And I think, as you said, with deploying weapons, like, there's no room for the two Welsh wingers in the 23, but Daly's still in there on the bench. I don't know.
No room for any part of that Welsh back three that was so good at the Six Nations, but such is life. They do have a decent team on paper. They are one up in the series, and
they could still win it. Could
absolutely still win it. Just looking at the game from the point of view of the two teams, I think starting with the box. Obviously, we've discussed the game till the cows come home already on the tour, but I think in the main you have to look at some key adjustments. I don't think that the Springboks are going to change who they are.
No.
They're going to play a mainly kicking, mainly defensive, mainly pressure set piece game. They're going to try and acquire penalties and ultimately acquire some chaotic tries in moments. They'll rely on their
turnover tries. Lovely neat on the transition is what they want to be. Which they saw from Peter Steff, you saw from Dialinde, you saw their instincts are there.
Yeah, neat on the high ball as well. If the ball comes bouncing into the hands of Colby or someone like that, they'll look to get those kinds of tries along with defensive tries.
Yeah. Indeed.
If the Springboks are to score 3 tries, the likelihood is, one is a maul, one is a crazy ungathered kick that ends up bouncing and they get it that way, and then the other is a defensive pressure try,
either turnover or some kind of
intercept or something,
smash and pick it up.
Those are their main kind of tries. That's how they're going to look to get their scores. But they do have some key adjustments to make off the basis of that first test. I think the first one is the defensive maul. The defensive maul, the Lions used that maul to kill the game, and it worked. And that is a point of pride for the Springboks. And there's a few, there's always a trade-off when you're looking at how to defend a maul. There's very specific tactics, and the use of one can at times prevent the use of another.
Yeah, you see that all the time. If you, the decision, do you jump when you're 5 out defending, or do you brace yourself at the bottom for the maul that you know is going to come?
Indeed. And do you try to insta-sack before the transition of the ball as soon as the ball receiver's down? Or do you come through as a unit and try and drive them to a stop?
Do you get your long-limbed men to try and front crawl through it, which is a tougher tactic these days now that they're zeroing in on the changing of the bind?
It is. They got one off with Etzebeth, but the changing of the bind is definitely a factor. How do you do it without giving away penalties? And at times, are the Boks overextending? And they are coming through too hard on the inside and just allowing the Lions to pivot to the open side and then get a clean maul going. I think there's a science to it as well, where sometimes you can try and overextend on the open side, force them towards the touchline, and then allow someone like Etzebeth to get in as they're isolated on the narrow side. I think they did that really effectually in one particular defensive instance. But for the most part, what was happening was they weren't able to get a playoff against that Lions maul.
They were either coughing up penalties or tries from it.
And they were at sea, and it's a point of pride for them. The maul is a huge area. It's an area that the South Africans understand. For me, it's the first port of call is that they cannot allow that Lions offensive maul to kill them the way it did in Test 1.
Well, it's a tougher ask, but it's one that all Tier 1 sides worth their salt, and particularly the Springboks are very good at. It's a notable difference in Tier 2 meets Tier 1 is that even some competent Tier 2 sides can get a good offensive maul going, but the defensive maul is just such a tough science, and they are always outmatched when they meet Tier 1 sides in that area, and that's why you see 4 tries from hookers and stuff. It's just,
And I would shout out, I know we're previewing the box, but I'd shout out Robin McBride at this point as the Lions forwards coach. They're very well organised and in tune with each other in a way that the backline and offense isn't.
They're more in sync. The rhythm to the takedown and the transition from the maul, and some of the work from, we cited Tyg Furlong, but also from Alan Wynne Jones and from these guys at the spearhead of the maul. very tough, limmy guys, powerful guys to deal with, and it's on the Boks to try and make that adjustment, because they can't afford to allow the Lions to have that much of an inroad into their territory with that kind of set piece. It's going to be a huge emphasis.
The second key adjustment, this is a refereeing one, but it has to do with the discipline on the offside line. Like, there are some penalties they're giving away which aren't explicable by tactic or by training. Like, you think of Quagga Smith just getting tackled and getting back up again. Disastrous penalty to concede, can't happen again.
Coach killing error.
Coach killing error is what you call them, I guess. But then there are other ones which are more structural, and it's a trade-off that the Boks have had for as long as Rassie's been in charge of them, and longer.
And probably longer. They want to apply pressure. They want to jump early. They want to be up in your face as quick as possible. But you see every now and then, like there was a case in the first half last week where I think it was an overthrown line, or a line out thrown over to Henshaw, which was met brilliantly by Peter Steff and Khaleesi, who smashed him. And that was like immediately good defensive hit. The set piece is stymied, but off the next phase, I think Dialinde just jumps early, and there's a penalty for offside, and it's 3 points, and it shouldn't have been.
No, that's the killer. Exactly. And it's the trade-off is like when things are threatening, it's more understandable. Like if the Lions are putting together 3 or 4 silky quick phases, if they're getting to the edge really quickly, then you might see the Springboks try and jump a little earlier, or at least time their run so that they're sprinting off the line as soon as they can legally be allowed to. But then there are other times when the threat really isn't there, and the Bok defence is so solid and so strong, and their quality of their tackle is so good, that the trade-off of jumping that little bit early in terms of the advantage versus the potential disadvantage giving away the penalty
like also,
is way off.
Put in a few hits already. How slick do you reckon the Lions are going to be? And on evidence, not that slick against their defence.
I think they could take in general multi-phase play, they could take a step off on their defence and maintain its integrity, just without giving up those crippling penalties and those crippling entrances, because the Lions have been very efficient once they've gotten into the red zone, into the scoring zone, and it's because the Boks are giving them entrances. They need to limit those entrances, make it as difficult as possible for the Lions to enter into their territory, and that comes from just being a little tighter on the offside line in particular. That's the one that they keep getting called on, that they need to.
It's as you say, it's a byproduct of that urgency to get up in the face and
which
create
can't
that,
go
that
away entirely.
No, it's still a key fulcrum. It's still their key avenue to scores, as we said. Like their offense looks a little shaky in the multi-phase, but their defensive pressure can yield scores, and that is a big part of their picture. But the trade-off needs to be there. They need to recognise that like they can't afford to keep bleeding these penalties, because not only are we going to allow them to get in, and we're going to be defending. I know we like defending, but defending our line ongoing, which just piles up the penalties, because as you say, refs, once you get into the red zone, refs are looking at everything the defence is doing, jumping early, getting a hand in a ruck or something, and not tackle all of this, and not really looking at the blatant sealing that is going on from all the latchers who keep piling around. Like the offence just doesn't get refed.
That is to change from August 1st. So
apparently but that's nothing to do with bias one way or another. It's just the offence getting it's how the game's refed at the moment. And the Lions have looked very efficient both at the maul and then at the kind of Exeter ball that ensues from the maul once it is defended. So all of that is just something best not invited upon yourself needlessly from the middle third, where a lot of these games have been played. The South Africa game, a lot of tussling in the middle third has gone down, and you can't be the side to blink first and to blink so needlessly on certain occasions, which they have been doing.
100%. So the discipline in that area is the second really key adjustment. The third I would cite is the aerial contest,
which Ian Naber did cite himself in the week. He said that was like a decisive factor in the game, which is a good point, more so than even when you about the ref. I'm glad that he said that, because it's like, well, that's true. It's unequivocally true, and it is something that you can improve.
And to be fair to Nienaber as well, he has struck a much more modest tone. Well, I wouldn't say Rassie was immodest, but he's struck a more introspective tone.
He is actually the coach, so he has to be a little bit more tactical. Rassie's kind of enjoying his water boy / kind of director.
Who knows what I am?
Just commenter, Maverick. Podcaster now, I guess. YouTuber. Yeah, he's
Don't
enjoying
forget
his
to like and subscribe.
That would have been funny. But Ian Naber citing that was encouraging if you were a Bok fan. It's just like, you were looking at the same game I was. We were vertically challenged for one thing, but also some of those Quagga plays were so massively problematic at the start of the second half, and really flipped the game on its head from one that we were winning to one that we were clinging on and then ultimately you bring in a guy like Visa, who's going to have to fill that role and has done a better job of it more recently. So that's a sensible change.
That's a good change, and they would hope that solves it. They'll also have to have someone on Duhan watch on that chase, because Duhan was a nightmare in the air. Like that there's a way to do that subtly and unsubtly as well. You can see them compounding it by trying to make that adjustment. Someone gets in Duhan's way, they're a step off the pace, and then nudge him, and then all of a sudden it's a penalty and an entrance. That's what you can't bring, but what you can bring is just like a little subtle, those not blocking but blocking kind of tracking runs where you're just running straight back lane, but putting your body basically between Duhan and the ball so that he has to run around you to get there, giving the catcher, the receiver, a little bit more time,
as well as pressuring the box kick itself and all of that stuff.
Just not allowing the Lions to exit so freely and recover the ball. It's going to be a huge point of emphasis on them this week, I'm sure, and making those adjustments I think will be absolutely key. Then there's a couple of other adjustments that I'd cite that the Boks absolutely have to make. The first is the offense, I think, in general. I think we made this point when we were reviewing the last game, but I just think a couple of years ago they were a joyous offensive side at times to watch.
They could get a few bad habits that cost them games.
Yeah, they could get to the extremities quite nicely. That hangover from the Heineke Meyer era, who's Heineke Meyer is remembered now as the coach that lost to Japan. He was so much more than that as coaches for the Springboks. He tried to fully evolve their play. And in his era,
brought Villy LaRue in.
Absolutely. And in their era, they scored some fabulous tries, moved the ball to the extremities. They got that coast-to-coaster against the All Blacks that you'd never see a Springbok team score these days. But they need to rediscover just a bit of that. It starts with Faf. Faf needs to be looking to attack
needs to be a little sharper than he was. He looked sharper in the South Africa A game than he did in that game, and that was just in terms of a few degrees off, which has a knock-on effect on the offense.
Yeah.
But you're right, of course. Their multi-phase isn't quite as threatening, and that last sequence in that first test is the big concern. Like you got your guy off the bench. He got up. He won the aerial contest. For once in the game, you got the ball back. You have a minute and a half to go to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, and you just look so impotent in those moments. And it's not just fatigue, it's shape and options that you're hitting that are just wrong and allowing the Lions to come into it. Whereas in the one moment that they did score a great attacking try, it was off a midfield scrum at the start of the second half that they moved it right through both Pollard and I think Khaleesi, and then moved it left, and LaRue put up a bomb which Mapimpi claimed, and they went again, and it was just a really good sequence
stretched
of attacking
both sides
rugby.
of the field and then ultimately broke the line and got the score, and they do have the quality out there to do that. They need a bit more system and structure in place. I also think just the fact that Faf is kicking everything right now, it has allowed the Lions have adjusted to it. Stuart Hogg was covering the backfield. We haven't mentioned Stuart Hogg yet, but he was covering the backfield supremely well. Basically had everything covered, and the Lions were able to predict what was going to happen. They knew the kicks were going to come. They knew they were going to be able to set up offensive lineouts, and then they knew themselves if they could work deep kicks, they could edge this kicking contest, and they ended up doing so. The Boks need to bring another element to their play where they give the Lions more to think about.
It's not dissimilar to what we saw from England post Autumn Nations Cup. We were tearing our hair out at England during the Autumn Nations Cup because they were kicking everything, kicking literally everything, no subtlety, no kind of shaping to do anything else other than just kick and defend, which is broadly what the Springboks are doing and what they did to them, which was kind of what we thought was inspiring their decision to do so. But then what happened was they got found out in the first game of the Six Nations by a team that were game to attack, that managed to open them up and then force them. They suddenly their backs were to the wall. Now you have to attack. And like that team that had been schooling the All Blacks through their power game and through their slick passing suddenly looked like rudderless and didn't have the shape, that they just weren't prepared to attack a game like that. They didn't know how to do it because the muscle memory doesn't last that long. And the Boks, we know, have those abilities in them, and we know that their wingers can be lethal in space. But when they were when they were behind and chasing the game ultimately, and they were a little bit leggy and they just didn't quite have the zip in it, their shape was poor and their tempo was not ideal, and the options they were hitting or folding into were just not sharp.
It was the options that were wrong for me as well. Like Faf has that wonderful wide passing game, but you do need to see the loose forwards picking sharp lines, and you saw some of that from Sia Khaleesi. Like Khaleesi would cut a lovely line between two players, break it and get to deck and present clean ball. the next phase we got to be going. We got to go around the corner. We got to really probe those
too often the next phase was a slow hit up.
Yeah, or just going back the other way with a forward carry, like something like that. That's where you need Faf to be sharp and to dial in those offensive instincts that were the hallmark of his game as he was coming through, and can very much still be. I think that the Boks need to find that element. I think they're going to need it if they want to win another World Cup as well. Like we forget that they're world champions and their Lions tour and everything feels so in the now. You know, there's a World Cup coming up in 2 years. They have an absolute target on their backs, and the All Blacks are waiting in the tall grass for them this year.
Later this year. And they still have the Lions there hoping to claim a test series against them.
Exactly right, but they're very, very physical, and at the moment they're going to need... They are a very physical team, the Boks, but at the moment they're going to need to dominate from minute 1 to minute 80 to get a win over the All Blacks, whereas the All Blacks will just need 2 or 3 moments to go their way to win that game. The Boks need to bring something more on offense. We saw against Georgia, Peter Steff in the wide channels. We talked about it in our preview. It didn't materialise. Neither offense got much off.
Of them getting wide and finding Khaleesi and the like, and even Peter Steff in the wide channels linking
off that one play. They need to see more of that. They need to get the ball to the extremities a little more often in the sort of offensive third, but also just in the middle third once or twice. They are going to kick the bulk of the ball, but the best way to win the kicking battle is going to be to add layers of subtlety to it.
If you have more options, it's tougher to cover the kick. Like if there are more options to worry about, the thing that like Hogg had a field day and he had 2 pacey wingers on either side, and tall pacey wingers who covered every blade of grass with him. Like at one point Anthony Watson had a defensive kind of catch and turnaround that was lovely and a beautiful kind of coverage, but it's the fact that even though that was a good box kick that found a bit of grass, they still kind of knew to expect a box kick, even though it was from an offensive scenario that you'd be very surprised to see a lot of other teams kick from. There was no element of surprise.
Exactly.
The kick was coming in. It was very surprising if anything else was happening, and it was only a reactive thing that led to anything else happening, rather than proactively probing a little bit and then putting the kick in, which will just make it a better kick already.
Exactly. We're trying to work your guys onto the ball from multi-phase, your explosive ball carrying and lethal wingers would be no bad thing for the Springbok team either. So working on the offense is huge, and then hopefully the last 30, which I think is your key adjustment. Can the bomb squad that's there, can they deploy their bench a little more sensibly?
Yes.
And add some
blow
impact.
Their load too early, to borrow a quite crass phrase, but yeah, like in terms of the front rowers coming on very early last week, just on the stroke of half time, left them. It was an unusual 5-3 split for them, not their usual 6-2, and considering the amount of forward oriented work that they forced their team to go through, it just makes sense that they have more forwards to bring in. And then you couple that with the fact that they've kind of flagged both in the last test and in the South Africa A game and pre-tour, it was the talk of coming in undercooked. Obviously they've been behind closed doors, COVID has forced it, but they played like a million Curry Cups and no international matches in the meantime, so they're feeling a little undercooked, and you're seeing that in those last quarters. So yeah, it makes sense that it's gone to 6-2 again, which it just feels more natural for this team and the way they want to play. And now it's on Nienaber to recognise the moments to deploy those guys and to make a better job of it this time, because they didn't get any the desired impact they definitely didn't get, but the only even bit of positive impact I could cite from the bench last week was Willemse. The rest of them really didn't perform that well or didn't add to it. They for some of them were forced, like Herschel Yankees had to come in because Faf was slowing down. And Willemse had to come in ultimately because Willie LaRue got the hit, which meant then that when Pollard was slowing down, then Elton has to come in, and it's like he juggles the ball in his 22, and that ultimately leads to the game icing penalty down the line. So it's all of these are negative impacts as opposed to positive ones. You want to see that flipped on its head if you're a Springbok this week.
Absolutely. And in the main, I think you just want to see them execute their plan. You want to see them defend relentlessly. You want to see them be hungry. Conor Murray's into this Lions team. You want to like, I'm sorry, but you want to target him. He's not as good at clearing the ruck. If you're Faf de Klerk, you want to be the quicker scrummy. A few times in Test 1 he was kind of trying to time Ali Price and run up and be onside to try and dive at him, but Ali Price was just clearing it from the deck, and it didn't pay dividends at all. He was firmly dialed in.
I love to see that. Because that's exactly the kind of hungry Faf play that can catch kind of lazy, slow, laboured Murray off guard very easily.
And that's what they need to be bringing. The Lions are going to kick a lot of ball if they can deal with those, tighten up their discipline, not give up anything on defence, and add a little bit to their offence. They'll feel they have enough. And then the other area of intrigue is the scrum. Makavunapola doing a decent job against Malherbe, but are they going to make the adjustments
now as well? They haven't seen Kitshoff
at their best. Kitshoff and Malherbe are relentless scrummaging beasts, and they
Kitshoff Furlong though. That's as box office as it comes.
It's all box office. I mean, it's definitely a massive battle, and the Boks will feel they're more than good to edge it as well. And I think another psychological one would be, they have their own offensive maul. They had so few lineouts. The Lions didn't kick anything out of play, and they have to be aware of that. Which is one of the reasons why they're going to have to work the ball into a bit more space to clinch the kicking game, is because the Lions have basically been allowing for the game to progress with a lot of ball and play time, not giving up the Boks penalties.
They actually wanted to. It's part of their game.
Oh yeah, totally. But if the Boks can apply a bit more pressure, they might force the Lions to kick it out, but via putting a good kick, probing kick deep, force the Lions to exit where they're either going to kick it infield from deep in their own half, which is not ideal.
With still some retreating men to get it,
or find the touch as they may have to do, and that's what the Boks want, is to set up their own lineouts and their own driving maul. And I think they'll definitely look at that as an area to say, like, oh, we have a driving maul too. This could be a psychological coin flip where we could get on top of you now, and all of a sudden you have to deal with a tough maul. So I think all of those kind of tight forward battles are where the Boks are going to look to adjust and get on top. But I don't see any sort of magical change to the shape of the games that we've had.
No, they're not reinventing the wheel, but obviously recognising what shortcomings they had last week and how to adjust to it. So it is the main talk is adjustments, and the adjustments will have to be made by the Lions as well. In terms of their game plan, as much as they won that first test. They did, but it was only by a score, and they'll admit as well that they probably did get the run of the green with the ref, and they were the beneficiaries of it. They certainly played the game better from what the ref was wanting to look at, but it's a new ref now this week. It all starts again from zero, from the clock and the scoreboard, and they have to arrive to the pitch of the battle. Like as you were saying, you would have liked to maybe have seen a little bit of rotation in the back row or something, some of these attritional positions that they're going up against these Springboks in. Haven't quite seen that. Now that they're there, we'll see if they're up to the pitch to kind of see this home, because it's going to be tough. It's going to be tougher. They have to anticipate that the Boks are going to be backlash here.
There's no question it's going to be tougher. There's also no question that what worked last week, they might have to put the foot on the accelerator for. We talked about in the build up to this tour about Finn Russell and the potential of a joyous Lions backline with Rhys Sammet and Russell and the boys, who I would have picked, who might well have got curbed by but just trying to beat them with offense and razzle dazzle. We will get that game, but we'll have to wait until the All Blacks play the Springboks to see it, because the Lions aren't going to give it, I don't think. They went back to they were kicked the leather off the ball, and it worked for them. They won.
It was the first two plays last week where they managed to seal the line-out ball very neatly off on both instances, one by Alan Wynne, one by Courtney Laws. First one was a bigger bomb, straight up, and that nearly worked, although they got partially pinned for a penalty. And then the second one, they tried a little skip pass out the back and got cracked immediately, and then it was more of that.
It's not happening. They're gonna kick most of the ball. They're gonna look to get on top. And listen, that offensive maul is such a huge weapon for them. Kicks to keep the ball in play, just probing the extremities enough to get Hogg on the ball and Bigger on the ball and find the right parts to kick.
Were in their few ball in play moments that were dangerous. It was the Bigger Hogg connection out wide that was working very well. Either Bigger at first receiver finding Hogg out in the extremities, or Hogg at first receiver giving Bigger a little bit more space to link with those guys. That's they're going to try and time those moments, but they will be looking to find some seams. But it's not a razzle dazzle helter skelter, let's attack you from everywhere. It's kind of a pick your moments and try and be accurate, but predominantly dominate the kicking.
And it's a tall and athletic winging combination. I mean, there's been much headlines made of the fact that it's such a tall Lions backline. It's because they've introduced Murray and Harris, who are both taller than their respective men, but that doesn't actually change the aerial game that much. It's the two wingers, Watson and Doohan in particular. They need to be launching the ball up to those wings and backing those guys to make athletic plays on the ball.
As opposed to predominantly, based on last week's evidence, predominantly the left-hand side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because actually Mapimpi was pretty good in the air, more so. He won most of his things. He only lost one that I can remember.
And he actually won one up against Watson on the other side as well. So that there is some truth to that. But I think that the Lions, where the box kicking is more about just chase for defense's purposes, it is a kick to give up the ball. The Lions need to kick to recover and transition. They need those exit kicks to be high. Infield, they don't want to give the Boks lineouts, and that's fair enough. I definitely get it. Keep the pace of the game up. But if they are going to be contestables, Murray's box kicking needs to be on the money, and they need to have the chase be on the money, and then get those athletic plays, turn over the ball, and then move it. either through like a hog spiral where you're pinning them back into their own territory and setting up from there, or by getting to the wide channels against a disjointed defence. That really is the Lions picture. And then, you hold the ball for a few phases at frenetic tempo, you back the box to give up a penalty, then you can go down the line and work your maul. That's your picture. I mean, that maul is so great if they can keep that going.
Dominant. It's been so good. I love the transition. You were right to cite Robin McBride as a really a guy doing a great job now. The Lions look so organised and so together as a cohesive unit. It's like it's the toughest thing to do when you're assembling a Lions squad. Like on paper you're looking at it, it's like, you're just assembling a superstar team from 4 different countries. How's that fair? It's like, well, the reason it's fair is that like the other team are certainly more cohesive as a unit. Like they know how they want to play. They know their identity. They have a national identity, sure. Whereas the Lions are kind of all over the place, fluctuating as far as like how should we play? Who should be the players? I don't know. Like it's a very tough task, and to have a pack that's so primed and so ready to go to war against the most domineering pack in world rugby, in the Springbok pack, and to be getting plays like that offensive maul off, that speaks to the forwards coach credit enormously.
Absolutely, and that is the main of the picture. Win the kicking game, get on top of them, and then just like those tight plays on defense, attacking the ball. Those turnover plays were worth their weight in gold, and it was just, it's not as much tactical as it is playmaking from the likes of Itoje. Curry was trying it as well. He was living on the edge and he was giving up penalties.
A couple of penalties. They were both in the first half, so we'll give him the benefit of the doubt because he kind of
did. Was it not?
Oh yeah, that's right. He was a little looser as well. But that's certainly more so than Laws or Cohen actually.
But they all had liberty to play make, and they all had liberty to attack the ball on defense. And while Itoje was of course the most successful with his freakish ability, they all fancy mixing it in terms of the physical stakes, especially on defense, as much as the Boks do. Getting out of the line, getting one man low and another man attacking the pill really did frustrate the Boks at times.
Yes, it did.
And that is like a key area where they need to focus and double down on. I mean, they put together a real tactical masterclass and a performative masterclass last week. They do need to do it again. I also think that they will need, in my mind anyway, I don't think the Boks will be as on the wrong side of the ref for one reason or another this week. I somehow suspect that all of those offside penalties that were coming their way won't. And I think that they will need to score. They might get that mull try again, but they'll need to score another type of try. And I think that they do need to have that dialed in. We still haven't seen them, poach that hole outside Peter Steph. I mean, I had Henshaw running that short line. He ran one short line off the set piece and he got smashed because he didn't quite get to that outside. I was
talking about the outside, the one at the very end of the first half where it was Hogg at first receiver to bigger outside to Henshaw, who was suddenly outside. It was Khaleesi in this instance, but outside that man that we were citing, and suddenly there was the hole.
That was sort of outside the 13 channel, but absolutely that was there, and that was the one clean break in the game. We do need to see more of that screenplay, and for getting Dan Bigger into second receiver pivot is no bad thing because he can execute under pressure. More than any of them, and the Boks will send the guy in the 13 channel into his face, and if he can keep executing those tip-on plays to perfection, that's a great source of it. But I also just want to see them dial in getting outside Peter Stephen between the 13 channel into that seam where Pollard kind of is, charging at that area, sitting them down and being quick off the second phase. I want to see them get to the edge and attack this Bok defense, and I think they're going to need to score like one of those tries, or at least get
better try.
I was going to say a better try. It's probably not fair because the maul is a beautiful
maul,
but they're going to need to score another type of try, I think, to win this game. That's my prediction, my solid prediction for the Lions.
It might need more than 3 points in the first half as well, because that's now 2 times in the first half that they've just been blown away. And as much as it's nice to finish stronger, and definitely a part of their game plan, as you say, keep the ball in play as much as you can by either kicking it in field or just kind of trying to keep the tempo high and also just the ball alive for as long as you can. Don't make it a stop-start game that the Boks want. Make it a kind of a protracted one because you fancy your fitness levels, and I think they do. I honestly think now, based on evidence of those 2 games that we've had, really, they've been the team that have finished by far the stronger and feel fit and fine, and they did altitude training in advance of this. Turns out they're not even playing at altitude, so all of that
still
positive
stands to them somehow.
Well, it does. When it's like when you see the Kenyans rock up to the Olympics and can run for days, and you're like, oh yeah, okay. So it's like, they're feeling very well prepared, so it's important that they finish strong. But I don't necessarily think that the Boks are going to remain that kind of slow towards the end, and I don't think that 3 points is an adequate return from the first half, despite the fact that they won the game, and it's happened twice now in both games.
Indeed, they're going to have to tighten up the cheap pens themselves in that first half, because as good as the Boks were, some of those points were very, very cheap, like the late hit on Faf, just a maddeningly cheap 3 to give up. That really can't be on the agenda. Defending gamely, but also winning the territory battle and keeping the score down in that period is key. And then in the second half, when you can introduce your game-breaking Tyg Burns and the like, that's when you look to spring. But I definitely think from a tactical point of view, early doors, yes, there's a lot of kicking. There's also moving the ball to kick in the right ways. I'd love to see Hog's boot get dialed in.
Yeah, the only spiral he dialed in was the very last kick of the game out nearly into the top stand and kaboomed it. But it's come on.
I'd work him into a little bit more space if you can, and get his boot in as well as the exiting box kicks. But if they can get on top with the variety of kicks that they have, pin the Boks back and control the territory game for the first half, then strike in that third quarter. And actually, to be honest, that 10 minutes before half time, the Boks have a big 30 minutes in them, but we've seen this a few times. They aren't as attuned to that period just before half time. Another thing they'll have to work on before they play the All Blacks.
The All Blacks have been putting poor Fiji to bed in those minutes more recently.
And to the Lions' credit, they have racked up most of their points in that pre-half time period.
They have even in the warm-up games when they've been a little floundersome for the first 30, they'll sometimes dial in those last 10 before half time, which are the championship minutes. It's important.
Absolutely. Either side of half time. Keep it tight and strike either side of half time. But striking does involve more than just an offensive maul and a good kicking game, and as good as they have been, the Boks will be a little better, and if the Lions don't expand their game a little more and add a little more offense to their brilliant forward performance, I think they will lose the test if they don't add a little bit more to their game. I think they will need to find tries in those key periods, unless of course the Boks give them loads of entrances and they can get 2 or 3 maul tries, and then you're happy days.
The Boks want to open us up with like a 3-minute red card 3 minutes in or something.
There's always these dynamics at play. It's a fascinating battle, and the Lions will have the advantage, but will they have it going into next week? Do you see them wrapping up the series?
I don't know. It's a tough one, isn't it? I was torn last week. I was torn between the head and the heart, thinking will the Lions edge it or will the Boks edge it? I think I voted with my heart rather than my head and said the Lions, but I didn't quite believe it at that time. This time I'm in two minds again, because it's a they've been 1-score games. It's very, very tight. It's a flip of a coin in my head. But there's part of me that thinks that the Boks flagging towards the end is a real concern. That's my main concern, more so than even the area, all the minutiae of what could, or the tactics here and there. But if they're going to flag again, they're going to lose again, and that's a disappointing way for the Test series to go, because then it'll vindicate all that pre-tour chat about undercookedness and perhaps the wrong time for it to happen and all of that. And I don't like to see a Test series come down to that, because I think what I would want is things to go more down to the wire, and if one team can't make it to the wire, then it's not going to go down to the wire.
Sure.
So that's my. If I start to see them flag, then I'd be very worried. But I'm encouraged by the adjustments, as you said, the 6-2 split back. I think they're recognising all of these problems. So my head is kind of leaning towards the slightly sloppy Lions, who still, like, even in their wins, even in their victory, like as we were saying in that first half, the few times they tried to move the ball, they got absolutely smashed. Including their one penalty of the first half came from a defense, like they got smashed off the line out and smashed again, and then it was a silly Springbok error to jump early. They had no need to, and if they didn't, then it probably would have been 0 at half time. So yeah, I'm thinking that if the Springboks do tidy up and have the staying power, that they will take the second test with probably by a similar amount, only a score, maybe 2 scores if they're that bullish. But I think it'll probably be a 1-score game, probably a 3-point game in favour of the Boks.
It's hard to tell. It depends, obviously, if the Boks find them. I tell you, if the refs don't take kindly to Rassie's antics and get really tight on the offside line, it could be a very long day for the Boks, and they need to keep their heads and not compound mistakes. But I do think that they made some good adjustments. I agree with you on that. I personally would have liked. Now, listen, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm second guessing Gatland on a million things, and he ends up laughing in the end, as he's always done. Laughing all the way to the trophy in most cases. So there is that element to it, but personally I don't see why you wouldn't have freshened up the pack a little bit as well as they performed last week. I think it's huge point of strength for the Lions, and I think it makes the Lions certainly series favourites from here on out. They obviously have the 1-0 lead, so of course they're favourites for the series, but the fact that they have the likes of an Adam Beard and a Johnny Hill and a Jamie George and a Faletau to bring into this test pack, and even Rhys Sammet and Josh Adams hungrily waiting to get their opportunity is just a massive point of strength. And if it comes down to the third test, the capacity to introduce 2 or 3 of those guys and take the game to another level, I think would be that could be a difference maker. But I think this test will depend on just what state that starting pack are in. How much did it take out of Alan Wynne-Jones to go as long as he did in that game? Even Courtney Lawes off at 72 minutes, such a big unit, putting in such a big show. Yeah. Can he replicate that same explosivity that he had last week, or is he going to be a little off the pace?
Yeah. Is he going to be hit by a hungry Visa who's straight in and fresh? Like, there's more freshness in the box side. And then also the 6-2 split for the box, I didn't disagree with at all. Whereas looking at the bench for the Lions, as much as you're citing all these weapons they're holding back, like when 60 minutes comes round, I like that Ollie Price can come on and up the tempo. Tyg Byrne as well.
Faletau. I think the bench is good.
I was more citing outside of that. What are Farrell and Elliot Daly going to add off the bench? I don't know. And looking at what Herschel Yankees and Elton Yankees were contributing the last week, that's kind of what I fear for the Lions. Is like, if they're behind and chucking those guys in, I don't know if that's going to change anything for the Lions from a Lions point of view.
Maybe not.
I'm looking at what the Springboks have picked, and I think they're probably a little bit more accurate this time.
Yeah, and I think I would probably lean box, just because I would say that the if they can channel the hunger and aggression, and I'd say the pressure that's on them now,
when's the last time they've lost back to back at home?
Yeah, indeed, and in such a big stage as world champions as well. Like, their pressure on them is enormous to deliver, and if they can allow themselves to respond to that in buoyant physical fashion, I think they could shock the Lions in that early stages. And then it becomes a question of, do they make those early stages count on the scoreboard? And if they do, I think I would go with box. But I suppose that's a long old explanation. I'd say probably the box, but I think the Lions to win the deciding test if they make the right adjustments. But it's very tough to say. It depends on so many factors that are fluid, which is why we don't really think the predictions aren't the most important thing.
Predictions are just for colour, but we're going to still give them anyway. I'm leaning box, but cheering Lions.
And happy to be wrong.
Happy to be proven wrong again, as we often are on this podcast. But that's going to be this Saturday, Test 2 of the Lions Tour. Huge game between two mighty teams now, and I'm just I was impressed with the first test, so now I'm just buzzing for the second. So excited to see this roll on.
Absolutely. And with that, we will move on to, after all of that Lions talk and all about the here and now and the dramatics of that series, there has been, under the radar, some World Cup qualifier stuff going on among the Tier 2 nations, which is of tremendous long-term importance. We have filled one of the 8 vacancies for Rugby World Cup 2023. Samoa last week obviously got through as I believe it was Oceania won. They qualified into Pool D. But there are other positions to be filled, and Tonga had a match against the Cook Islands to set them up with a game against the winner of the Asia Championship between either I think it's now South Korea and Hong Kong, who will have a playoff to play the winner of this Tonga Cook Islands game. And as you can see likely on the screen behind me, it was a comfortable win for the Tongans, as expected, 54-10. They had some pretty plays involved. There was a good highlights package put up there by the All Blacks, which I think I didn't get to see the game, but I got to see the highlights there, and it was a good solid package. Fafita on the left wing from Tonga looks a player,
awesome,
knocking
powerful
lads aside. And the Cook Islands, while they had some hustle to them, were motoring backwards at the scrum, and genuinely not a team of professionals.
No,
just
they looked
trying their best.
They did try their best. A few great hits in there. That was always good to see. And the pre-match pageantry, the two hakas or the two war dances meeting each other, Pacific Islander rugby at its finest. It's just great to see the Cook Islands out there doing that, because as we decided before, it had been 3 years since their last Test match. So it's always going to be a tough task for them to get up for a game against a side of the quality of Tonga. But they were definitely up for it, and you can see that by the gusto with which they went into that pre-match kind of thing, and then the fact that it was a tight game for around 20-25 minutes with a few kind of crunching hits and a good 3-pointer, and then ultimately they got a nice try peeling off a maul. So good positives from, like, if you're going to play your first Test match in 3 years, you do got a try. You got 10 points. That's not all bad.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it wasn't all bad. They were comfortably the beaten side, and Tonga managed to get some good tries on the board.
They did.
Notched up a 54-10 win. Not too much to say about it. Pretty nondescript.
No,
but I would say that the Tongans are in a decent position to certainly they would be strong favourites going into that game against the unknown quantity of the best Asian side of Hong Kong.
Yes, that's true. And if they're underprepared, they will be worried. They will, obviously, preparedness has been kind of... Preparations have been at the forefront of the conversation throughout this series, and then the Samoa games as well. Just the discrepancies and the gaps between what's available to South Sea Island teams and Tier 2 teams in general versus Tier 1. So that has been ongoing. And with all of those European-based players unavailable, Tonga used 17 new caps throughout this series, which is a positive. You can flip that positively. It was forced, but that's a good thing to get a few caps under your belt. And also just the Cook Islands will still, just going to make mention, they do still technically have a chance to qualify.
Oh, do they?
They do, through the final qualifying tournament in which they compete against teams from the Americas, Europe and Africa. The repechage they go into.
Is that right? They go into the repechage even though they lost this game? I thought they were done, but that's an interesting one when you consider who doesn't get into the repechage.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, no, I don't think the repechage will go that well for them because there's some good teams in that repechage, but they're not completely out of it, and they will get a couple of other test games under their belt, which is good.
Right. Well, listen, that's probably no harm.
Yeah,
fair enough. But fair play to Tonga. They've set themselves up, and they will have a game later on in the year, which is as yet unannounced, between either Korea, I believe, or Hong Kong. I know Malaysia are the other team in that competition, but I think I read somewhere that they're too far gone, but it'll be the winner of that competition anyway, which is usually Hong Kong, who they'll take on in a playoff.
That's where we're hedging as well. Just going to make mention actually of Tutai Kefu. We'd quoted him last week. He's the Samoan coach as well. He's actually a former Wallaby back rower, but he had a good little tongue-in-cheek, very Wallaby or very Australian kind of bit where he's going, anyone know any Tongans after last week? Because apparently he'd identified almost 25 props and reached out to, and they'd all been unavailable for this tour, like nearly 25 Tongan props.
And I tell you what, they made mincemeat of the scrum regardless.
Yeah, indeed. We all know Tongans are big and powerful, but the scrum was one-way traffic in this game as well.
The Tongans are a great rugby people, and they're a fine rugby team, certainly at this level. They win all their games, but will they win all their games against the lower level opposition? But for competing at a World Cup and going strength to strength going forward, a bit of organisation and support is going to be highly needed for them. If they are to truly compete, they do usually find a way. They do. Come World Cup time of putting all their talent together.
They have a similar, there are a few levels below, but in terms of what Argentina would do, where in the middle periods in between World Cups, they can look truly awful at times. Now that being said, they can also look very good, but nothing quite compares to when they get into a camp and they're organised and they're at the World Cup and they do that first. They get a first little pre-match routine beforehand, and then they just get pumped for it. They do peak at World Cups better than probably Samoa historically as well, despite obviously the recent evidence they are not as good a rugby team as Samoa currently.
Right now, that's in flux. That is always at the World Cup they were.
Yeah, and they may very well be again if they can make it that far. But there's still some work to do. They're nearly there, but still some work to do for Tonga. But it's nice for them to get a win on the board all the same.
And good for them to set up that trip to Paris in 4 years. They're one game away now, or one qualifier win away.
Yes,
the Tongans, and then they could well be in by the end of the year.
Absolutely.
But that's the story of that game. We are going to move on also and look at qualifiers in South America.
Yeah,
where there was another fixture.
Quali, as they keep calling it, or Qualisar, I think. Yeah, which is just a weird abbreviation. But
it was a game between Uruguay and Brazil is what we had at the weekend, which wrapped up the round robin competition between those two and Chile. And it was a star performance from the right wing. Gaston Mires saw Uruguay pass Brazil by a score of 36-13.
Yeah, comfortable enough in the end, out in Montevideo, as it usually is when there's South American rugby of consequence. It's normally going down in Montevideo these days.
Yes, and the home side saw Brazil after a tough enough first half. That result now confirms Uruguay as what the qualifiers are branded as South America 1, and it also confirms Chile as South America 2 after Chile's win over Brazil. Yeah. So Brazil make way.
Yes,
now,
they do. They join Colombia in the not in the mix category.
They are unlike the Cook Islands. They don't have a back door into the repechage. Yeah. So Brazil's brave efforts, despite the class of Duque from 12 kicking their kicks and trying to make things happen,
and Mr. P. Try making an appearance on the board as well from their good maul. They do have a good forward pack that are game for some of it, but by the end, Uruguay, having started sluggish. Did kind of open up on them. They scored a lovely try in the first half actually as well, Uruguay, but by the end they were comfortably better, and then they were fancying their own maul by the end, and it was yielding cards.
Yeah, no doubt. A great performance from Uruguay all around the pitch in the second half, especially. They did see off the challenge well. That now confirms them as South America 1. It also confirms Chile as South America 2.
Correct.
This is because Chile obviously had that earlier win against Brazil.
Yeah.
So now Uruguay are, as a South America 1, await the winner of the USA and Canada, who have a 2-match playoff coming up in September. Which is going to be a fun battle to see, and it's also kind of unfortunate that people, hopefully, it's outside of the traditional test windows, so hopefully some non-MLR players are allowed to be released, although one would suspect probably not, for that important World Cup qualifier. The winner of that game between the US and Canada plays Uruguay, and that is a playoff for America's 1, the first American qualifier, straight into the World Cup. The loser then of the winner of USA and Canada, who will say just for the purposes of illustration that America win that game, USA win that game against Canada. So USA would play Uruguay. If Uruguay win that game, they're straight in as America's 1. Then the USA is the loser of that game, have another game to qualify as America's 2 against a playoff match between Chile and Canada, assuming Canada lose to the USA. Yeah. Chile as South America 2 would play North America 2. The winner of that match has another chance to qualify against the loser of the first qualifier match. So a bit of a mess there. And then I believe the loser of the America's 2 playoff goes into the repechage.
Yeah.
And then so conceivably you could have Uruguay America's 1, USA America's 2, Chile losing the qualifier go into the repechage, Canada bye repechage.
Yeah.
So I think that's the format then for the Americas qualifying. But like it's a good wee format, and Uruguay have staked a claim for themselves.
They have. Well, Uruguay look probably the most cohesive currently, but that can all change. It's all in flux in terms of form.
Plenty of talent in the US.
Plenty of talent in the US and some hustle and talent in Canada as well. There's a few twists and turns before all of that's decided. But one thing we do know from the last few weeks is just how much South American rugby has come forward, because we know Uruguay, they're no longer an unknown entity after their exploits at the World Cup and that great victory they pulled off. But now just even to read back the results, like they obviously won comfortably there 36-13 against Brazil.
But it wasn't comfortable at half time. They were behind in parts. They had to work for it. They finally found the extremities and their skill set told.
They did.
But it wasn't a clean performance by any stretch.
And they coupled that with the 15-10 last week that we were mentioning as well, where Chile ran them right down to the wire and very nearly got nicked that game as well.
Oh, sorry.
But excuse us there. But and then with looking at the Chile Brazil game as well from earlier, and it was 23-13, a 10-point game. So as we suspected, it's just very, very tight up there in South America, and but all the teams are kind of growing, which is nice to see. And it's worrying times if you're going to be in America's 2 coming into that little qualifying match against Chile, presumably at this point. You're going to be like, risky there. There is some tape on them. They'll be wanting to watch that.
It's conceivable that Chile could Chile and Uruguay could qualify as 1 and 2 out of Americas and leave the USA in the repechage game.
Definitely not be what World Rugby are hoping for, but stranger things have happened. So we're going to keep watching developments in that, but obviously that's all kind of wrapped up for the time being in South America. We're waiting on focus shifts to North America now, and whenever that 2-legged affair between the US and Canada goes down, we'll be there to cover that as well. 100%. A very fine looking Uruguay team as well. That as we know from the World Cup, they were without Kessler and they have been consistently without Hirata. Their class number 9, but they have some very fine players: Felipe Berchesi, Freitas and Miras on the wings, and Silva at fullback. Even Villaseca at centre was very impressive as well. They have some lovely players with lovely touches in this team. So only exciting things to come from Uruguay, I think, and I'm looking forward already to them at the World Cup, although they can take nothing to the bank just yet. No, not quite there yet in terms of South America's qualifier. Nothing confirmed, but Uruguay quite in the driver's seat, and Chile still in position, and we say adios to Brazil for this time around.
Absolutely.
Yes, and we're going to look now briefly at the Rugby Europe Championship, which, as you'll know, we've been covering with some intrigue over the last few weeks, as we've had a little spell of games that have taken place this summer now that the Netherlands have been confirmed as in the tournament.
Yeah.
We did promo a game last week that was between Netherlands and Russia. However, that game had been rescheduled. It wasn't on last weekend. It's been pushed to November alongside the Romania-Netherlands game, which is also rescheduled. Those two have been slated in for the 6th and 13th of November, and then there are also two other games, actually, Spain v Russia and Netherlands v Spain, that are just to be confirmed. They've been rescheduled, but those are the 4 outstanding fixtures from Rugby Europe 2021. Which will obviously, they'll reschedule them at some time because they do need to be played, because they kind of roll into Rugby Europe 2022.
They've got to put them in November as well. They've got to figure out a way to do it. But Netherlands obviously have back-to-back games there, but I think there's 3 weeks of test window going on there. So between the rest of the arrangements, they need to put Netherlands, Spain on the alternate week from their games against Russia and Romania. Quite a run for the Netherlands, and then they need to put Spain, Russia on presumably the weekend that Romania play the Netherlands would be the sensible thing to do. If they can figure that out,
I would think that would make sense, because it's using the test window that's available to them, because then the Rugby Europe Championship starts again fairly early next year as well.
That's the only way you can be sure of getting your play. You can't even be sure. Obviously Spain struggled to get their players who are in France, even when they are during test windows, and they should be obligated to have their players. One gets the sense that the French clubs largely ignore such rules when it comes down to it. They have some tough discussions with players behind closed doors that they're definitely not allowed to have, and that's definitely an unfortunate factor. But hopefully they play those games then in November. But as you say, now unfortunately we are out of games in Rugby Europe for the time being. Portugal have been the story. Georgia, of course, rise highest as they always do.
Well, Portugal and Georgia are both done. They're the only teams, I think, that are done. They can relax. They can put their feet up. They're first and second. They're in great spot.
Can't be putting your feet up, but they have to be getting ready for next year. It's only half time for them, but they are done in the 2021 iteration of the competition, and everyone else has, are left in the air. They don't even know when they're going to be playing their fixtures, probably in the November window. They're going to have to use that to their strength.
New pre-season and a whole other string of change. It's going to be a tough sequence, tough old slog, but it's a marathon rather than a sprint, because these seasons are kind of combined, the 2021-22 one. But all of these teams are still just chasing points. Any point will help, and like teams in the position that Russia are in, or even Spain, who are way back on the table currently, and Romania will all be desperate to just get as many points as they can from these remaining fixtures, and then rolling into next year, because with Georgia away with a Grand Slam as they have, and then probably running away with it next year, although not definitely.
Never know.
But they are almost a shoe-in for Europe 1, as they almost always are. And so Europe 2 is that spot that we've been keeping track of as all these teams jostle for it, and that'll just roll on into next year. Nothing decided like it was in the South Sea Islander ones, and nothing even as close to decided as it has been in the South American and America's one.
Still a right old scrap for Europe 2 and Europe 3, lest we forget, gets into the repechage, and the repechage is going to be an open tournament, but right now I would favour the European third place team. Like certainly Romania against Canada or Chile would be a very interesting game.
True.
If nothing else, but that repechage, someone's going to come out of it, and it's definitely it's a carrot worth fighting for as well. So there's all sorts of intrigue going into Rugby Europe next year, but I guess for now we can't have to park it.
We're just going to sign off on it there, and we're going to move on to Tokyo, where the Olympics has kicked off with rugby sevens. We've already got some medals. The men's competition did finish, and it was Fiji again claiming gold. Their second ever gold medal, their first ever coming the last time around when sevens was first introduced. And it's like, it was always a thing. It was always a gripe of ours about the Olympics, that it's like, we're rugby fans, like, of course Fiji and the Islander thing, they're such uber athletes, get them into my rugby team straight away. It's just that no particular Olympic sport seems to highlight what they're particularly good at until the sevens comes along. They were awesome. They deserved their victory. They were very much the better team in the final. The final took place against New Zealand, who, credit to them, a much better showing than what they had 4 years ago. They were very disappointed with I think they had a loss or two, maybe two even, in the group stages, and they met Fiji in the quarterfinals, I think, last year, and fell victim to them at that point, so there was no place in the podium for them that time, but they secure silver. It was a justified one. They were really good throughout the tournament, but very much second best in that final, and Fiji just totally deserved it.
Fiji really, from they started off pretty not great, and they had an opening kind of game where they struggled a little bit against Canada as well.
It was actually Japan pushed them close in their opening game,
and I think Canada as well. They only beat by 14.
Right.
So it was like it was not an ideal start, but then when they played Great Britain, they really did click it into gear.
Yeah.
And Jerry Tuwai, I mean, Ranraja actually, who we'd highlighted in the preview, he was a peripheral player as it happens.
He came off the bench. He did secure a nice game sealing try in that semi-final.
Yeah. But for the most part, it was the traditional sevens boys. But Jerry Tuwai was head and shoulders, I think, the best player in the competition. He was everywhere, delightful, mostly on offense, of course, where he eats. But he had some lovely defensive touches as well. Mm-hmm. But he was just everywhere, controlling play, dictating things, putting these talented class players in the right direction. Yeah. And I would also give a shout out to Tui Vuaka, who is just a monster of a man, an absolute killer out there. And geez, you'd love to see him get a cut at the 15s game as well. But
he looks like he could handle the physicality anyway.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, he could be another tigerish Fijian.
Or you could just stick around with these sevens boys and go for gold again.
That's it.
Go for the hat-trick.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's they were a delight to watch, as they always are, and they were physical. They were more defensive this time around.
They were.
They added the offense was always there, and they were able to take tries when they needed them, but they weren't soft. They never gave you anything easy. Yeah. And that was really a telling factor. They didn't switch off either.
Whereas, like, even that in that final, the unfortunate play from the New Zealander over his own line. What was his name actually? The Kiwi had a very poor final, even though he'd had a very good tournament. He juggled the ball under his own Newstub, Andrew Newstub, and it was a good story. I was loving the comms on him. He used to be a painter or something, and he got the call late call late in life to come up and represent New Zealand, and he had been really good in some of the other games I'd seen, but he had a few clangers in the final.
Fijians did an absolute job on him. I enjoyed Nano Satoro and Regan Weir and a few others in the tournament. They were definitely worthy silver medalists. I'd also shout out Argentina. Fine showing from them.
They were awesome. They put I remember watching the All Blacks put 50 on South Korea and thinking like, geez, I can't remember ever seeing 50 scored in a sevens game, or certainly not recently. It's a lot. And then sure, the Argentinians go and put 55 on them.
56
even
just
on
8-7.
Yeah, that being said, South Korea were pretty poor.
They were class though. They were hungry. They were brilliant at taking tries. They had a poor game against New Zealand in the pool stage, but outside of that, they were brilliant. There was like Argentina in full on cup mode.
Well, that game against the South Africans was their opus, because the South Africans impressed the hell out of me when I watched our opening game, our Irish Chargers getting absolutely mugged off by them. They did such homework on us and just did a job, and I was like, these are our medal contenders. And like, they were medalists last time, but the Argentinians with 6 men on that big pitch just defended them so well.
Early red card, they just held the ball, and the South Africans couldn't get a foothold, and they just played a really smart game, got to the extremities, managed the breakdown area so well, and just the contact zone in general, and shocked the South Africans, who couldn't, just despite having the extra man, they seemed to expect things to happen for them, but it didn't, and Argentina went out and took the game.
They did.
And by the time the South Africans got a foothold, it was too late.
And they did the same again in the bronze medal match as well, having had their disappointing showing when they got knocked out of the gold medal race. Ultimately, like, they were seemed a little bit fatigued, probably after that Safa game and defending or playing with 6 for so long. But when it came time for the medal match of their own, the bronze medal one, they were much better than GB. Team GB had a decent tournament as well and looked a good team. They faded a little as it went on, and the Argentinians looked the more ferocious in that contest.
I honestly didn't think they were as good as I thought they might be. GB, ever since they got stuffed by Fiji in the opening round, and then from there it was definitely it was questionable as to whether they wilted a little.
Like, considering some of the showings in the group stages in their first 2 games as well, like they just didn't look like they had the same energy. Like, Norton was good in the groups, and then he kind of was quieter as the tournament went on. It just didn't quite fall for them, and they ended up in the worst place of all in these Olympic games, which is 4th.
Indeed, they did. Their highlight obviously was that game against the USA, when the US took a 21-0 lead, and then they came back in the second half very dramatically. And it was wonderful television for everyone watching as well.
Good promotion for the game as well. That was a great. Like, I've seen a few people just romancing a few of the games that have kind of got the eyeballs on, and that was definitely one of them, because that's part of what Rugby Sevens at the Olympics is all about, is just getting more eyeballs on the sport of rugby and putting on a good show.
Yeah, no question. That was a very good showing. That was probably one of the highlights of the whole tournament, where the semi-finals and final became a bit sort of tighter and less less sort of dramatic, I suppose, in terms of the way the games played out. It was it looked like there was one side on top for most of it, even in that third place game.
Yeah,
the Brits definitely looked a bit sluggish, and
they did.
Guys like Lindsay Haig just didn't show what they had shown in seasons gone by, and looked a little slow and tired, really, and it was just they just didn't quite have the balance right, I don't think, and they probably didn't deserve the medal, where the three medalists
it was tough to argue. I think they were probably the best three teams. In the first couple of days I was fancying the Safas, but then the Safas got a number done by the Argentinians.
Argentina ended that game with 5.
That ended it.
So it was definitely a fun tournament. Lots of great games. I was a little gutted from our point of view about Ireland, who, for my money, are a very good team that didn't show up at all, and that was really. It was disappointing, to be honest. They're a lot better than what they showed, and
I think that's
they probably allowed the pressure to get to them a little bit. They'd had more media attention over the past month than they'd had in the 5 or 6 years previous.
Sure.
And guys like poor old Jordan Conroy, who I really thought would seize the moment, was just dropping balls, and he must have turfed like 3 or 4 or 5 tries that he would have had otherwise. Then he just dropped the ball. He was out of sorts, and then he was missing tackles. That came against Kenya, where they needed to win by 7, and they raced to a 12-point lead and just melted. They spent the rest of the game on the Kenyan line, but just almost
dropped everything.
Were fearful of crossing the line and seeing themselves into the quarterfinals, and in the end took off Terry Kennedy with 2 minutes to go, and then shipped a predictable try to cost them their place. And it was quite painful viewing from an Irish perspective, but not unfamiliar viewing. We're well versed at seeing our teams melt on the biggest stage.
Very well touted, very competitive teams that I'm sure they will show their quality over the series that they're now involved in.
They're a better team than all that.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll pop up somewhere like Hong Kong or so Texas or something, winning a series event, but it probably won't be Tokyo based on recent evidence. As much as I like Japan and everything they're about and watching their teams, doesn't seem our teams like playing there. No, unless it's our rowing team. But so it was disappointing from an Irish point of view that they just didn't quite seem to show what they were about. Whereas they did do that in the qualifying tournament a few weeks ago, which was probably didn't serve them that well, giving teams like South Africa such fresh tape on them to work their game plan in. But we didn't quite see what we had expected from our charges. But that is a side note entirely, because take nothing away from deserved and retained gold medalists Fiji who are now just dominant in this Olympic Sevens era that we're in, and it's up to someone to dethrone them.
I'm delighted for them. Best team in the world, deserved gold medal. Well done, Fiji. Absolutely class. The women's sevens has also kicked off. You guys will have seen more of it than we will have had. There's more games overnight.
We've had one day of games so far.
Interesting start. There's a few teams looking strong. New Zealand women always looking very good. The Australian women really flexed their muscles with a 48-0 win over Japan, where
that was very impressive.
Just bits of what they were doing were really good. Hunger on defense, speed off the line, quality of passing was excellent. Really wide class passing off both hands from the Aussie women. They're gold medalists, and just given as well and how in general how well the Aussie athletes seem to be going, I would certainly highlight them as a medal threat, if not a gold medal threat.
Up there, France putting 40 points on Brazil as well. French
Fiji.
Women I would not underestimate either. New Zealand women always thereabouts as well. Beating Kenya seem a bit out of it. Team GB are still in the mix. They did lose to New Zealand women, but they had a scare against their
Russia.
way home against Russia. My God, they scarcely deserved it, but Russia pinged for time wasting of all things.
Those Russian women are pretty good as well. They're
are
good in the breakdown, and there's definitely there's definite potential in that team as well. But those are the early favourites. But there's
Fiji
still
women
a long
out there
way to
as
go.
well. The Fiji women not to be written off to do the double, do what they didn't do 4 years ago, and make it 2 golds for them.
No question.
They did beat Canada's women, who are pretty decent as well.
They had an early loss to France, but they should be able to bounce back from that. The main of it will be decided, I believe, on Saturday. That's when the gold medals and such will be decided. So we'll have a look back on that next week. But the women's is still progressing, and you guys, as I say, will have seen more of it because there's more games to come overnight. But an exciting start to the women's competition nonetheless, and looking forward to seeing that one develop as well as the sevens takes the global stage.
Hopefully it delivers like the lads one, because it's just very entertaining stuff, and I'm glad.
I'm biased. I'm watching a lot of Olympic stuff, and from my point of view, it's the best sport there. And I'm biased, but I find it's more interesting than the swimming and the rowing and the and the handball. I think it wins. That's my take. Rugby is king.
Yeah, well, that's definitely our take here on the Overlap Rugby podcast. Is that rugby is king. That little BMX racing racing game is pretty good.
Yeah, but sevens is better. Come on,
skateboarding's pretty good too.
Skateboarding.
That was the new one this
year. Get out of here with your skateboarding.
Gonna pivot into the Olympic podcast now that we're doing.
Get out of here with your skateboarding. But it's all about the sevens.
It is all about the sevens, and so far we have only Fiji and the All Blacks, or New Zealand, and Argentina, a full Southern Hemisphere sweep in the men's, and it remains to be seen what becomes of the women's tournament as well. But exciting stuff in Tokyo.
Absolutely. There's other matters to look at in the club game.
Yes.
Major League Rugby is finally reaching its finale.
Yes.
Here this week. We have an Eastern Conference winner and a Western Conference winner set to duke it out in the championship game.
That's correct.
That's the exciting times this weekend. ATL edged out Rugby United New York with a late try, 10-9 in humid conditions.
Finals footy, you telling me?
In Atlanta. It was a tight game, 9-3, and ATL got a late pick and jam try, which, gotta say, there was a blatant truck and trailer in the build-up. If the American rugby public are educated enough, they could have been apoplectic about it and done a Rassie Erasmus-esque video given out of it in a New York accent, the law says, I can't do a New York accent.
I don't know. It doesn't come up in rugby commentator speak most of the time, but we hopefully
it was a good win from ATL.
What I would say is, despite that, they were the team that went for it. Whereas the pattern of the game was that the defences were on top in both circumstances, so both teams were not going for it, and they were taking the few threes that were available to them, and it finally got to that point, and ATL did decide to go for it.
They were 6 points down.
They had, but they went for it, I think, from 69 minutes, and then were repelled and went again. So it was,
and then gave away a truck and trailer penalty, and that could have been the game,
but it didn't happen. No, they managed to sneak it and got just rewards, I guess, for going for it.
They managed to get over. Such are the breaks if you're in New York, but they didn't score a try either, and it was a tight old finals footy game. From all the razzle dazzle that had been taking place, it was telling, and I know it was humid conditions out in Atlanta, but it was telling that it became really tight and a 10-9 game in a semi-final, which is probably reflective of how finals footy goes world over a lot of the time. In the other game, in the Western Conference final, we had the LA Giltinis beating the Utah Warriors 17-13. Coming up with a few late scores here as well. They were down in this game, the Giltinis.
They were down, and they were being dominated at both set pieces, both line out and maul, but line out and scrum. Where the Rugby ATL were all over it. Utah Warriors, I should say, were all over it. And they'll be looking at themselves as why weren't we clinical enough with all that possession, really? But a
worthy lesson to be taught by the Giltinis, the Aussie boys.
That was
with an American try scorer off the bench. But
that was right. Yeah, well, the opening try was a beauty in terms of transition from kick return. It was unfortunate for Mikey Teo because it was funny just hearing JP Doyle scream at him that the ball was live. I think there was a box kick that went into his 22, but it was tipped. And so he was touched, carried back, and I think Teo's just there, Mark. And he's touched, carried back, play on, and he's screaming there on the rest mic, and then finally Teo goes, and then counterattacks and nearly pulls off a beautiful stuff down the touchline, but turned over, and the Giltinis transitioned nicely, attacked the short side a few times, and Adam Ashley Cooper is there at the end to step inside the three overcommitted bodies and just take the try, as he's done many times before. But that was only for 7-0, and with the set piece struggling as much as it was, and then guys like Giddo flagging after there was a contact late in the second half that he took a bit awkwardly, and he had to go off and got disjointed as they had done. But it was, as you were saying, that winger, the American winger off the bench, Ryan James, who grabbed one try to get them back in it, which was a nice spot from the halfback as well to just skip it out to the space where the quick guy was, which is just good instincts. And then he combined well with that halfback again for the game killing play. An Australian halfback actually at the Harrison Goddard. He's very good actually. He's another part of the Australian tempo of this team. But flooding that short side and giving their quick former NFL prospect a chance up the right hand touchline, that was all they needed. A good little show and go did for Mikey Teo, and Chris scored a game-winning try, and by that metric, it was a better game than the other semi-final. There was more dynamics to it, and it came down to the wire, and then it was a really good try that was scored to claim it. So well done, Giltinis.
The Giltinis all season long have been the team bringing speed and finesse to this game, and Utah have been a great team as well. Definitely mixed it with them, had a game plan. If they maybe had one or two more things go their way, they could have nicked it.
Sure.
But in the end, the more clinical side exposed the lack of clinicality of the dominant forward oriented side. It's a tale as old as time in rugby. And the Giltinis came in and got a wonderful win and set up probably a deserved place in the final after a fantastic season, a debut season where they've come in with all this Aussie influence and played a really quick, exciting brand of rugby with all of these cool screen shapes and inside balls and blindside wingers and just introducing attacking concepts.
Good innovation to bring to a fledgling young competition, which is the MLR. This
not
is
fledgling,
well, it's only season 3, isn't it? So it is kind of it's getting its still finding its feet in terms of the stylistic kind of emphasis, and the Giltinis are a welcome introduction, an injection of something. And now they've won because by virtue of having the most points. I think the final is going to be at the Coliseum in LA. So if they can win it there, then it is very much a Giltini season and an LA kind of story to the season, and it'll be on the other teams.
I make them favourites as well. I like ATL. I think they're a good side. I think they move the ball well, but they try and kind of almost play a similar game to the Giltinis, except perhaps not as competently. So I would fear for them actually going away to LA. I think there's teams perhaps like Utah who put up a very good fight, who are better placed to unsettle the Giltinis and get after them, NOLA being one as well. But actually, and even New York, I felt probably might have given them the better game. But my theory is that ATL might get themselves involved in a shootout and lose by 10 or 15.
There you go.
Because the Giltinis are quite a clinical team. But I think they would be deserved winners. Anyway, for those who are interested, I think it could be an excellent game. It's been an exciting league season. It feels almost like a renaissance for the MLR. It's definitely great to have attacking classy footy, and they'll build from there. I'd love to see this guy James get a run out in an Eagles jersey
and just bring speed.
Bring speed and flair to USA rugby. It's desperately needed when you look at the national side struggle. The championship final then between the Eastern Conference and Western Conference champion. That's at 4 o'clock Eastern time on Sunday, August 1st, which is in our money anyway in the UK. I believe that's about 9 o'clock. So decent time as far as kickoff of a final. It's not overnight or anything.
No.
And that game's going to be taking place for all of the marbles this Sunday. So if you're interested, the rugbynetwork.com I believe it is, and they just stream it for free, so you can watch it at kickoff time live, or you can watch it back afterwards. You can watch it whenever.
They put some highlight packages together, somewhat sloppily, but they put them together all the same and chucked them out there as well. So it's definitely a really good resource, the Rugby Network, and it's if you're interested in that game, it's a really good.
If you want to watch one of the games, this is the one to watch. It's the final.
100%. And then the only other bit of news is that the collegiate draft, of which they do have one, Collegiate Draft 2021, is going to be taking place on August 19th as well, when some college stars are going to be joining the MLR teams. So that's going to be intriguing as well. But for the main show, it's in the Coliseum. It's August 1st. It's this Saturday. It's 2 teams, and then there were 2. It was LA Giltinis. It's going to be versus Rugby ATL, Atlanta versus Los Angeles. And who's going to take it home? We know that we're going to have a new champion in the MLR. We just don't know who just yet.
Absolutely, looking forward to it. And there's also, before we just wrap up the club footy, there's also some Currie Cup action going on, as well as the NPC has kicked off in New Zealand as well. So that domestic footy is going on. If you can get your eyeballs on that, there tends to be some great stuff there as well.
That's true.
But in the main, club footy has taken a back seat as we enter into the test season. And we have nothing more to do really than add our rugby news of the week, of which there is a bit.
That's right.
Unfortunately, we have to end on a really sad note, which is that former Fijian second row and head coach Sam Damoni passed away at the age of 52, which is very sad news. Really, way too young to go. He plied his trade throughout his career in the UK, Australia, Fiji. Played for London Irish, Saracens, the Waratahs. Towering 6'7", lock, and yeah, he won 6 caps for Fiji between 1990 and 1991, and then of course was head coach of the side from 2010 and brought them to the 2011 World Cup. So very sad news to hear really there, and much respect to him and much thoughts and love out to their family, of course, because that's just far too young to lose a legend of the game.
Yeah, no, indeed. Yeah, that was kind of sad news to hear to start it up as well. And then we're going to couple that with some other not happy news, and we're going to recurring segment of more players have joined the lawsuit because former England international Jason Hobson and retired Exeter Chiefs hooker Neil Clark have joined the lawsuit against World Rugby, the Rugby Football Union and the Welsh Rugby Union. The Hobson and Clark are now amongst 175 former players who have come on board and started legal action against the governing bodies over the alleged failure to protect players from the risks of concussion. Both men have been diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, early onset dementia and probable CTE as well, which is a familiar story now but not a good one, following their careers in the sport, which were ended in retirement in 2014.
And indeed, and I mean the points can be belaboured but probably really isn't made enough that rugby has a major problem to address, and that the safety of the game and the players involved needs to be paramount, and that doesn't need to be doesn't need to be lip service nonsense from an Aussie broadcaster who goes player safety's paramount, but hit him in the head because it's fun. That like the all of these conversations that are had and the scorn that's given to sort of red cards and to trying to tighten up the game are necessary for it's swimming against a current that is in place to try and protect players first and foremost for their own safety and their own health. We don't want the cost of playing rugby and exciting us all to be dementia, early onset dementia, like just the worst possible thing that you could imagine. We don't as best as we can prevent it. We don't want that to be a consequence of playing the game, and it's unsustainable. Like the matter of fact is, you can't have a game where most or even a sizable portion of your players are getting dementia at an early age as a result of playing it at this level. Can't. The game will become unsustainable. People won't want to play it. People won't want to watch it. And more is the point. The people will sue, and they'll be right to sue, and they'll have to get their money out of it. And it has the potential to bring the game down, and there are mitigating steps we can take. I'm not on the band. I'm not aboard the group that says that rugby should be not played for kids, or that I understand that there's I think the values highly outweigh the risks of playing rugby, and that there's actually tremendous value in contact and physicality as well, and that you shouldn't. I'm not anti that by any stretch, but I think the minimum we could do is try and take those brutal head collisions out of the game.
And then the other bare minimum is to look after guys like these. The other side is the burden of care is not just what you do to officiate the laws in the game, but also once these unfortunate circumstances reveal themselves, there is a burden of care. That's why they're suing the unions, because although many unions are tight for cash, they don't know if there will be a settlement that they're able to pay, but there is still a duty of care there, and a duty of care while they're playing.
I think they're also looking at just while they're playing, like if you get a concussion, you have to the right protocols have to be put in place where guys aren't returning to the pitch with when they've had a concussive symptom, or even just a probable concussion. We're still
probably progressed from 2014 when these guys retired in early aughts, but it'd be folly to say that we're all there yet, because you still see dodgy examples of guys.
Cowan Dickey got knocked out in a game for England and played next week for the Lions. That shouldn't be happening. That shouldn't be happening still. There needs to be the fact that the graduated return to play protocols allow a guy who got knocked unconscious on a rugby pitch to play the following Saturday is still a problem, and I definitely
it's still an argument of convenience for the coaches and selectors involved, and it's like, oh no, he's still available for next week. We gave him his mandatory 5 days, which it used to be 21 days or a few weeks, but now that we have another game, a big game next week, it's fine.
It's just an easy explainer around. Like when that question came up, it was like, oh, he followed all the protocols, all the return to play protocols were followed, and the follow up to that needs to be, well, what are these protocols and how do they work? Because That doesn't seem right.
The only image we saw was him laid out on the unconscious on the ground last week, and now we see him lining up singing the anthem this week.
There's danger involved. People's heads have to be protected. You need to mind your head.
Yes,
as much as we understand that it is a risky sport, we want to avoid that as best as possible. And it's obviously just terrible news to hear more guys getting early onset dementia. It's just such a miserable thing. Listen, as best we can, we're going to gracefully transition from that sad, depressing
somber
news.
Start to the news.
There is also other news. Edinburgh have had some movement. Obviously, we were talking last week about Richard Cockrell's departure from the club. The Scotland coach Mike Blair, Scotland's assistant coach Mike Blair has been appointed as the new head coach, which is an interesting role for him. First up,
it's a good step up for him, and he's obviously former halfback Mike Blair, then assistant coach, now up to coaching of Edinburgh. That's a good little progression. We'll see how he gets on.
He's been on his way. I'm curious. He was definitely a guy who liked to move the ball at times. I'm curious to see what style of coach he's going to be and whether he can blend the hardened edge to some extent that they've developed with more attacking footy. But a positive step in that is the two Argentinian acquisitions that they've made now this week. Ramiro Moyano, the classy winger who's made fools of the All Blacks before in his highlights package, and Emiliano Big Boot Boffelli, who is a class fullback and still a young man, also signed for Edinburgh. And Moyano, who's not in the Argentina squad at the moment, is going to be available for pre-season.
Yeah, he's coming straight there on his way to Edinburgh from Toulon, I believe.
And Boffelli then will join up after the Rugby Championship. But those are some pretty major Teckerful acquisitions. Now they do still have some problems inside the back three that they'll need to resolve. But if they're to see any ball,
yes, indeed.
But I still think this is
an
movements.
Improvement. This is a good sign for Edinburgh. It's kind of what they needed, because they had stalled. They had progressed, as you're right to say, under Cockrell. They definitely gained a bit of an edge.
I know,
but this season was a stall in terms of that upward progression, and they need to mix it up somehow. So new coach who is a former back as opposed to a former forward,
and a former player of Edinburgh,
stylish Argentinian back players to kind of mix it up in there. You saw what Willem Mata can do for them in terms of opening up the kind of more kind of industrious Scottish approach to the game, just kind of facilitating that with some nice Fijian hands. We'll see what the Argentinian dust can do for them. There's definitely scope for Edinburgh to become very good.
Yeah, I think it'll bring something alright if they can blend the right pieces of the puzzle together. It's not all negative in Edinburgh. I mean, there's a lot of people down about the loss of Cockrell, but for me, he'd taken them as far as he was gonna. And actually, if they can use this Blair appointment, hopefully Blair is up to the challenge, and they can use it as a springboard then to move on and develop their game, and hopefully keep the hard edge that they've developed, and then add layers to it. And then who knows, it could be back to competent Edinburgh mixing it with the good sides, like Cockrell told them they were never going to do. So maybe it's best he's not there.
Well, that's this season was not good, but that was his Leinster chat. Other Scottish news actually was that they announced another fixture, wasn't it? Are they playing Tonga? Is it later?
That's right. They're going to play Tonga in a match in November that is outside of the international window, which means that in all likelihood Tonga won't have their players.
Another 25 new caps.
So while it's well meaning from Scotland in terms of they want to get as many games as possible for their own sake, but also mix in games with the tier 2 nations,
which they are doing due diligence to. They're probably paying more than lip service to it, which is more than you can say for some of the other teams.
It's great. One hopes that Tonga sees a bit of money from the game as well, of course, but they're going to have a game against Tonga, but unfortunately it's going to be outside of the test window, so
who knows what kind of Tonga we see.
It might just be a needless shellacking, but that is some news, all right. Likewise, the All Blacks have a match also set up outside of that test window in Washington DC for the first time ever. So that's expected to earn New Zealand millions in revenue as well, which is, I believe, the main reason it's going to happen.
They shifted it to an 82,000 capacity seater in the FedEx Stadium.
I love that. I love that.
With the optimistic thought of having fans back and filling that out for the All Blacks and having a grand old money-making show.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I frankly think they should go back to doing what they had done before, which was playing like the Maori against the Eagles, and then the All Blacks played Ireland back in Chicago in 2016, which was a good money-making venture for both unions. But also it was a better event because as much as the Eagles are trying to take steps forward, there isn't much sense in a rugby playing sense and having them take on the All Blacks.
By Ireland, so take on All Blacks next weekend.
Exactly. The All Blacks are a daunting proposition for the Eagles at this stage, and I think they could have done a similar event, but just had like a a game between the Eagles and maybe a Maori team, or the Eagles and somebody else, followed by the All Blacks. That might have been the way to do it.
Maybe.
But instead, the Eagles will get the opportunity to take on the incredible All Black team that's developing at the moment. The match is going to earn some good revenue for the All Blacks, and I believe some for the Eagles as well.
I'd say so. Yeah.
So yeah, like in the main, it's obviously a good thing that's going ahead. But from a rugby sense, on October 23rd, it's not going to be as interesting as all that.
Probably going to be a one-sided shellacking,
Yeah.
But it's just taking the place of the All Blacks Italy game we were deprived earlier in the year.
Yeah, when you're going to sell out a stadium of 82,000 to American fans who will probably be showing up to see what the All Blacks are all about, there will be a decent portion of rugby fans there who are buzzing to see a rugby game.
Yeah,
but I would say
a lot of deep pocketed guys who are just kind of sports fans.
That's
but not really interested in
that'll
it.
be the majority of the fans at the game, and I'd love to have a better show to put on to them than just the Eagles getting smashed by the All Blacks.
The Ireland All Blacks in Soldier Field, there's no doubting the drama and the spectacle that was there. It was a proper test match, whereas this probably won't be. And like, people don't tend, like, even if you know the sport inside and out and you're as diehard as we are, sometimes you're watching a blowout and you're like, this is a blowout.
It's a blowout.
Skip, fast forward. And if you're a half interested casual sports fan, you're going to look at a blowout and be like, okay, well, this is a blowout.
That's the shame of it, is that they probably could have done something better. But listen, as a money making exercise, it makes good sense.
True.
So there's also that's the main of the news. There's also one other story coming out of Australia, which is interesting, which is that Marika Korombete is officially leaving Australian rugby and the Melbourne Rebels after this was sort of a much touted thing that might happen, and there was negotiations back and forth. But he's confirmed a move to the Panasonic Wild Knights, who are not going to be getting any weaker after winning the top league this year in Japan.
Win the top league and then sign a world class winger, and that's the way to go.
That is the way to go. But Korombete departing the Wallaby Shores, and it's left Australian rugby in an interesting position. They're at a kind of a crossroads, but at the moment now you're looking at a potential World Cup season. When you consider what World Cup and the success of the national team means to the rest of the game all around in terms of interest, like, it's a lot of stock now that they're potentially leaving behind. You're looking at Korombete, Will Skelton, the two Arnolds. I mean, there's a lot of talent.
Scott Fardy, I guess, but he's retired.
Scott Fardy's retired now, but there are more to come as well.
Yeah.
There are more to come.
Yeah, no, he won't be the last to leave there. In terms of really good players. I know Gitto and some of these guys over in stateside as well, but they have a lot of exported talent, and the question is, can they afford to ignore it? Really, I don't know, because as we were saying, that they don't quite have the depth anyway, and if they're doing a campaign, we saw in 2015 Checa kind of bent the rules because he was saying, look, we need support here. I'm gonna bring in Drew Mitchell and Matt Giddo, despite the fact that they're outside of the Australian no residency rule. I'm just gonna make one up because I need these guys. There might be a similar bending of the rules to come. But
that's a temporary fix. I mean, I think they're gonna have to look at the very real possibility that guys are going to leave and they're going to need to pick them. It might need to be a more South African model where you just put together your squad of your mass exports. Like, there's also some class young players playing in the MLR who obviously are untested at a test level, but you might want to get a look at. Like the Aussie, it would be like, from their point of view, it's about the balance of their domestic game, which is important. And if they lose all the Wallabies from their domestic game, does it just completely erode all of the interest from what was a very good Super Rugby AU season? And are they in a position to pay their players anything to stay here? Like, I think that any money that they do get, they should invest some money in incentives for players to stay here. But the success of the test team is kind of paramount, and they might have to get themselves into a situation where they have to accept that a certain portion of their talent is going to go abroad and pick them regardless. And then hope to develop the Super Rugby AU competition as still a very good competition that's hotly contested, where fans can engage in the local rivalry of everything and use it to develop players. And they'll still have those wake-up call games against the Kiwi sides not too far away as well. But when the Wallabies are playing in the big events, they might need all of their best talent. And I'm sure it's a conversation that'll develop in the weeks to come with some daunting-looking Bledisloe tests looming for the Wallabies.
Well, it's an interesting question, is it? Because then you could do something similar to what Ireland have done as well, which is the opposite side, where
Ireland have the same.
They have the same rule where we won't pick you if you're not a resident here, except we need Sexton, so Sexton's coming. We'll pick Sexton even though he's away, but like Corabetti can apply to that. They can make that rule for Will Skelton, but then it means that you can still have your behind closed doors conversations with someone like, I don't know, Ned Hannigan's leaving and he wants to still get a Wallaby thing. And it's like, no, we have ample stocks to replace you from within our ranks. If you go to Japan, we're not picking you. It's like, but you pick Corabetti. It's like, Corabetti is a world-class winger who scores a load of tries for us. We're going to pick him for that reason. You know, like Will Skelton is a giant man. We're going to pick him. You know, like,
are you as giant as he is? There's probably that's
a balance between the two approaches rather than hardlining anything, because I don't think they want to. I don't think they know.
They don't want to open the door to the guys that are there,
yeah.
But the door's already open.
It's ajar anyway, for sure. It was definitely interesting news. As you said, it was kind of anticipated. There was musings. I think the contract negotiations weren't entirely private anyway, and he's just such a big star for the Wallabies that he's always going to attract attention and interest from big foreign pockets. So he will be playing a top league next season, and it remains to be seen what the selectors and the Wallaby selectors do about that, and it balls in Rugby Australia's court in terms of how they want to go forward into this final, the second half of this kind of World Cup cycle, if you want to dub it that, and how they prepare themselves for France.
Absolutely. Listen, that is all the news we have, and that is all the show we have for you this week. It's a little shorter. We don't have as much around the rugby world going on, but obviously the main bulk and meat of what we're talking about is all about that Lions tour.
Yes.
And listen, we're going to be back obviously next week with a debrief, perhaps on the series. The series could be decided
this time
as early as next week.
But even if it's not, which probably, I don't know, we predicted that it wouldn't be, but it might be. It remains to be seen.
Could well be all over come this time next week.
We will be back next week to look back on Test 2 and look ahead to Test 3, which will go ahead regardless.
Absolutely, and not to mention, next week we're going to be previewing Bledisloe 1. It is back. The Rugby Championship is back in all of its glory, and whether the Springboks are triumphantly entering into it after the back of a comeback Lions win or licking their wounds, they're going to be a huge added dimension to what was the Tri-Nations last year, and we've just got 4 world-class sides geeing up to go at each other in the highest quality rugby competition we may have ever had.
Yeah, sure, like the All Blacks looking so good recently with their Fiji test. You have the Australians coming through a great test series with France. You have Argentina beating the Six Nations champs, admittedly shorn of a few players, but up in the Northern Hemisphere. So all of them coming in with form. The Safa's obviously getting serious hit-outs against this British and Irish Lions team. So they're going to be primed and ready. All 4 teams primed and ready. So the Rugby Championship gets back underway next week, and we'll be looking at that too.
Absolutely. And listen, if you do enjoy the show, if you are interested in hearing us talk about any of that stuff, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. You get notified when we upload. We aren't the most consistent when it comes to what days we do and don't upload, so if the
bell might be handy resource for that kind of thing.
You might miss us. The bell will be good for that. Comments are always good fun. We love hearing your chat down below. Shane gave all the good commenters, all the regulars a good shout out at the beginning of the show,
and I really mean it.
And he really means it. So be sure to get down and have the chat about the rugby down below. And is there anything else you like? You comment, you subscribe. That's about the main of it.
I think that's the way.
Share. Does anyone share anymore?
You can share it if you want. Yeah, rugby with your rugby playing or rugby enjoying friends. You can share it along or share some of our clips. But in the main, just keep watching them.
And wish my hand the best.
Yes, speedy recovery for this man. Hopefully he'll have a smaller bandage next time we see him.
Absolutely.
All right. I suppose with nothing else to say, we will say see you later now.
Goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Europe.
Left hand. Interesting. There's no way. I have no feel.
The quirky change of feel. It was a low one. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Rubbish.
No, it was a little low.
Also low.
Francois low.
Not good.
Ding. Alright, we'll see you next time.